No one in the room could have foreseen the terrible tragedy that unfolded in the cold silence of the hospital. The autopsy revealed that the newborn boy had no anatomical anomalies, and his lungs and heart were in perfect condition. But the air in his lungs indicated that he had managed to take his first and last breath. The boy was only 38 weeks old. The whole story is full of mystery and horrifying details that make the blood run cold. The police immediately realized it was no ordinary coincidence. The baby's umbilical cord was torn as if it had been chewed with teeth. The mother, Alexee, claimed that the child was born dead, but the autopsy proved otherwise. The baby suffocated. Who was responsible for his death? And what is hiding this 19-year-old girl, whose mother interfered with the investigation in every possible way? Alexee is accused of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence, and the lawyer accuses the medics of negligence. The denouement of this tragedy promises to be shocking, and each day adds more questions. Why is the mother trying so hard to hide the truth? What dark secrets are hidden in this family? And who is really responsible for the infant's death? Alexee's fate, her future, and the truth about that terrible night will be decided in the courtroom. But one thing is already clear. This case will leave a deep mark in the hearts of all who encounter it. When the doctors found the baby, they immediately realized that there was simply no chance of reviving him. He had no heartbeat, he was not breathing, he was already blue. The baby did not give a single sign of life. The experienced obstetrician, who had saved the lives of newborns many times before, was outraged by Alexee's actions. All she had to do was call for help and hand the baby over to the doctors. He would have been fine. But instead, she chose to handle the problem differently. With each passing day, the investigation was getting closer to unraveling the mystery surrounding this tragedy. Who was Alexee? This girl whose life had become a nightmarish maelstrom of accusations and suspicions overnight. Alexee Trevizo is a 19-year-old girl whose life seemed to be perfect. A diligent student, a talented athlete, a member of the school choir, she always stood out among her peers with her determination and success. But behind the outer facade of the perfect schoolgirl hid deep and dark secrets that no one even suspected. That unfortunate day began like any other. No one could have guessed that it would be in the bathroom, that a drama capable of shaking the soul would unfold. Alexee hid her pregnancy for fear of disappointing her mother and losing her impeccable public persona. But how did it happen that a young girl, frightened and confused, found herself in such a terrible situation all alone? When the pain of labor became unbearable, Alexee locked herself in the school bathroom. No one heard a scream or a moan. It all happened too fast. When the moment of birth finally came, Alexee was alone, terrified and completely unprepared for what would happen next. The newborn boy's breathing came as a shock to her. In panic and fear, she made a decision that changed her life forever. Now, looking back, everyone wonders why. Why did Alexee throw her baby away? Why did she try to cover her tracks? The answers to these questions remain hidden behind a veil of horror and shock. But one thing is certain. The truth will inevitably come to the surface, and the secrets of this tragedy will be revealed. Alexee Trevizo, a young 19-year-old girl from the small town of Artesia, New Mexico, USA, where only about 12,000 people live. Despite the fact that everyone in this town should know each other literally by sight, little was known about the teenager. Alexee attended high school, was a member of the university cheerleading squad, and was a cheerleader. Her parents divorced, and Alexee, along with her sister, were left by court order to live with her mother Rosa. The mother was very strict. Later, the woman got together with another man, and the whole family began to live with her stepfather. Alexee's relationship with her mother was quite strange, but we will come back to that later. It seemed that Alexee was living a normal teenage life. She was studying, going out with friends, and had been dating a guy from school for about 3 years. Everything was normal until this incident happened. On January 26, 2023, the girl came home and went to bed quite early. However, later she woke up with a severe pain in her lower back. Alexee got out of bed and turned to her mother, informing her that she felt unwell. This happened around 11:30 p.m. The woman decided it was appropriate to go to a medical center. They got into the car and went to the nearest clinic, the emergency department of Artesia General Hospital. The doctor on duty, upon examining her, was concerned that it could be a urinary tract infection, which often develops into something more serious, including kidney problems. It was suggested that the girl might have kidney stones. The doctor also noticed that Alexee was wearing baggy clothes and seemed to have a rather large belly, which made him suspicious. The doctor asked if the girl could be pregnant, but both visitors vehemently denied this, claiming that Alexee was not sexually active. Despite this, the doctor decided to make sure and conduct a pregnancy test. To stop the girl's unbearable agony, she was given painkillers. The doctor suspected that the girl was hiding something from her mother because of her strange behavior. Alexee wore a baggy sweatshirt and refused to be examined. However, in order to assess the condition of the abdominal and pelvic organs, as well as to look for kidney stones that could cause pain, it was decided to conduct a standard ultrasound and CT scan. Literally, an hour later, a positive pregnancy test came back. At that time, Alexee was in for a blood test. The doctors, after learning the result of the test, became even more worried, as such symptoms in pregnancy can cause serious abnormalities. They waited for the patient to return to examine her. At about 1:30 a.m., Alexee returned and, upon hearing about the test, said that it was a mistake and that it simply could not be, for she was innocent. She then abruptly stated that she really needed to go to the bathroom and ran away. Surveillance footage showed her leaving for the restroom. A few minutes later, her mother, Rosa, was shocked by the news and followed her to the restroom to see if she needed any help. The girl refused to open the door and wouldn't come out, even for her mother. 10 minutes later, Alexee still had not come out of the restroom. The staff of the medical facility gathered outside the restroom and asked her to open the door and tell them what was going on. They all heard strange sounds and noises through the door. The toilet was constantly flushing, water was pouring from the faucet without stopping, and the girl was tearing off paper towels. All of this caused serious concern. Her mother and staff urged Alexee to open the door and tell them what was wrong, but she adamantly refused. She said she didn't need help and that she would be out soon, but continued to stay inside. Eventually, the doctor on duty could not stand it and went to get a key to get inside. When the door to the room was opened, they saw a shocking picture. There was a lot of blood on the floor of the restroom. Bloodstains were even on the walls, literally splatter marks everywhere, as if flesh had been torn behind the locked door. Even seasoned doctors found themselves stunned at how ominous the place looked. It was also noticeable that the marks had been attempted to be wiped away with paper towels, a pile of which were scattered on the floor and in the trash can. The employees began to ask Alexee what had happened. She replied that she was just menstruating, which explained the bloodstains. But the medics, of course, did not believe it. There was too much blood. They assumed that the girl had miscarried in the restroom, but where could the baby have gone? The staff examined the restroom but did not find the infant there. The girl, meanwhile, returned to the room and the full wrath of her mother descended on her, indignantly demanding answers about her pregnancy and reprimanding her, while Alexee sobbed. Meanwhile, the paramedics called the cleaning lady on duty to clean up the restroom. When the woman entered the bathroom, she was literally stunned to see so much blood for the first time in her many years of working at the clinic. The cleaner began to clean up the room. Other staff members asked her to be more careful, because it was assumed that something bad had happened here, perhaps a miscarriage, and the patient was hiding it. The woman performed a cleanup, scrubbed all the blood on the walls and floor, and decided to empty a full trash can. But when she picked it up, she immediately realized something was wrong. It was unaccustomedly heavy compared to its usual filling of paper towels. The cleaning lady called in other employees to check what was inside the bucket. They opened it up and found a suspicious black bag under the paper towels and several other bags. The medics had looked in the bin earlier, but there were only paper towels on top and several empty bags underneath, so they didn't look any further. The officers opened the suspicious bag and found a scary find inside. It was a dead baby. When the nurse pulled the little body out, they realized that Alexee wasn't just pregnant. While she'd been behind the locked door, the girl had gone into labor. Another detail seemed particularly gruesome. There was a garbage bag over the baby's face, sucked tightly over its mouth and nose, as if the child was trying to take its first breath. Doctors speculated that the bloodstains on the walls were caused by Alexee literally ripping apart her placenta and umbilical cord with her hands, and then probably flushing them down the toilet. From the beginning, Alexee hid her pregnancy. What she was doing in the restroom caused her to bleed heavily, so doctors assisted her after she returned to the room. She was then bluntly informed that a dead newborn was found in the hospital restroom trash can, and everyone assumed it was her baby. The staff at the medical facility had to get the police involved in the case, and the dead baby was taken for an autopsy. Detectives had to find out all the circumstances of the incident, interview the failed mother herself and all the medical professionals who had contact with her that night. Until the police arrived, an adult remained in the room with Alexee at all times to supervise her so she couldn't do anything stupid. At that point, it was already known that the baby was born premature, 9 months old and viable, and the mother simply killed it by wrapping it in a bag. The brutality of this story shocked everyone. When Alexee and her mother were told that she was pregnant and that her baby was found dead in the bathroom, she continued to lie. Alexee feigned surprise, as if she was hearing about all this for the first time, and it wasn't her baby. This behavior is common among such young offenders. Amazingly, she actually skillfully concealed her position throughout her pregnancy, switching to oversized clothing and not exposing her belly. No one close to her, they said, even realized she was pregnant. Her mother, Rosa, was perplexed. She reported that she bought her daughter monthly pads and had no idea that she might soon have a grandchild. However, detectives later began to suspect that Rosa was not new to her daughter's situation. She may have continued to buy hygiene products simply out of curiosity, to see how long her daughter would continue to cheat. In rare cases, pregnancy can indeed pass so imperceptibly that even the future mother herself does not suspect it. The belly in such cases practically does not grow, you cannot feel the movements, and the menstrual cycle can continue. But in Alexee's case, it is doubtful. If you look at her last photos before the birth, the big belly immediately catches the eye. For example, in the photos from her cheerleading performances, it is completely incomprehensible how her mother, boyfriend, teachers, classmates, and other cheerleaders did not notice it. It is simply not believable. When talking to the girl's acquaintances and friends, the suggestion that she had mental health issues was voiced several times. This could explain everything that happened. If a person is sane and fully aware of what is going on, how can they hide their pregnancy for 9 months, deny the facts proven by doctors, come to the hospital, then go to the restroom, give birth there and throw the newborn into a bucket, hoping it will go unnoticed? However, Alexee was not just a child or a schoolgirl. In fact, she was a mature 19-year-old. She was probably so afraid of the wrath of her strict mother that she went ahead with this gruesome crime. But she didn't fully realize that all things secret come to light. At that time, the doctors had already realized that she was pregnant, and it would not have been possible to hide what had happened anyway. It is known that at the time of these events, the girl was in a long-term relationship with a guy, about 3 years. The police talked to the boyfriend of the girl, Devin Fierro, who arrived at the hospital with his mother, having learned about the hospitalization of Alexee. The boyfriend said that he had no idea she was pregnant and did not notice such a rounded belly, thinking that the girl had just gained a little weight and her belly did not seem big to him. However, he also noted that Alexee suffered from developmental problems. She had deformed hips, so she regularly went to a chiropractor to get rid of the pain. From time to time, the girl felt bad. She complained of pain in her back and hips, and each time it was perceived as the course of her chronic ailments, so everything was limited to going to the chiropractor, who also did not notice her delicate situation. Strangely, her condition did not prevent her from being a cheerleader, moving around a lot and being active. Detectives let Alexee go home until the circumstances of the incident were clarified, respecting her constitutional rights and allowing her to continue her schooling. The girl returned to her normal life as if nothing had happened. She went out with friends, attended school, and dated her boyfriend. Alexee and her boyfriend even attended the prom at Ortezia High School. While the investigation was underway, information about the incident was hidden due to Alexee's young age, and no one in the school knew about it. But later rumors about the incident surfaced. The information spread quite quickly and widely in the educational institutions, and everyone was shocked by the news. Alexee's mother also found out about it, which made the woman furious. She accused the police and medical staff of breaking the law and revealing her daughter's confidential information. During communication with detectives, Rosa behaved very rudely and defiantly, justifying her behavior by violating her daughter's rights. The woman did not seem to care about what her daughter had done, nor did she seem to care about the death of her grandson. The autopsy on the infant continued.
It was an unusual case. Such examinations take quite a long time. It was necessary to wait for its completion and results to determine the crime and to understand if there was one at all. Only after that, the state prosecutor's office could bring charges against Alexee Trevizo and arrest her. During the investigation, detectives repeatedly spoke with the medical facility staff who worked that night,
as well as reviewed the clinic's surveillance footage. Doctors, nurses, and a cleaning lady clarified the story of the incident for police as much as they could. Many of those interviewed were confident that Alexee knew what she was doing. After all, she had run to the bathroom to give birth as soon as she learned that her pregnancy had been disclosed in order to get rid of the baby and mislead the medics. But despite her attempts to hide what was happening, it was all too obvious to the experienced medics, and her plan had failed. Alexee looked confused and was clearly trying to hide something from the moment she arrived at the hospital. She very reluctantly agreed to ultrasounds, CAT scans, tests, and examinations. In addition to the oddities in Alexee's behavior, her mother was also behaving rather strangely. If the laboring woman herself could be a bit unhinged by the events, her mother exploded at literally anything. When the medics reported what they found in the restroom and voiced their suspicions, the woman screamed in rage at her daughter and everyone around her. At this time, Alexee was depressed, which resembled remorse. The doctor who examined Alexee that evening echoed her mother's words. In his opinion, she was lying about having no idea she was pregnant. Alexee's mother had only noticed that her old clothes were getting small, but blamed it on her immoderate diet. She also used birth control pills, but later it was proved that the girl started taking the pills after she noticed her rounded belly, and it was pointless. In order to prove the fact of childbirth itself, it was necessary to find the placenta. However, none of the medical staff managed to do so. What happened to it was not clear. The staff speculated that it might have been flushed down the toilet. There was also a small possibility that this important piece of evidence was accidentally thrown out with the garbage by the cleaning lady. There was a large amount of blood around, lots of bloody paper towels. During the cleaning process, if the placenta had been badly torn to shreds by her hands, it simply might not have been noticed in this bloody mess. The doctor on duty who used the key to get Alexee out of the restroom also testified to investigators. According to him, he was puzzled by the amount of blood. It was hard to tell exactly how much there was, as the entire restroom was covered in blood, both the walls and the floor. There were so many traces that the doctor was worried that the girl might have done something to herself. These fears appeared for the reason that she took the disclosure of the news of her pregnancy very negatively and was very afraid of her mother. At the same time, the doctors learned about the patient's position quite quickly. According to the rules, with similar symptoms with which Alexee was admitted, it is obligatory to take a urine test to check the likelihood of pregnancy. This is necessary so that the future woman in labor does not take drugs that can harm the fetus. After the incident, the girl was taken back to the ward and given an IV. In addition, a blood test was taken, and the doctor had to perform her examination, which showed that she was in labor. At the same time, a cleaning lady was called in, who discovered the baby in a trash can. The doctor noted that the girl's mother took the news of her pregnancy completely inadequately. It was obvious that Alexee was afraid of her. She was literally shaking with fear. Even when the doctors confirmed Alexee's delicate situation with 100% certainty, the girl continued to argue and deny it. It was pretty weird for a now fairly mature 19-year-old cheerleader to deny the obvious. Alexee was literally afraid to tell her mother that she was sexually active, claiming she was still a virgin. This is not unusual, as many teenagers fear the wrath of their parents in such sensitive matters. However, in the case of Alexee and her mother, Rosa, the situation was much more serious. When there was no point in denying the obvious, Alexee claimed that it just came out of her during the toilet. She didn't realize what it was. She was scared and didn't know what to do, so she just threw it in the bucket. But no one believed that either. How can you not realize you're in labor and not recognize the baby? Plus, it was obvious she was trying to cover it all up, trying to wash the blood off and hiding the baby's body farther away in the trash. So her words sounded completely implausible. At first, the mother of the woman in labor, Rosa, was convinced that Alexee had indeed miscarried and saw nothing wrong with her throwing the fetus away. But the doctor who examined the baby's body explained to the woman that her daughter had a healthy, full-term baby who had probably died of asphyxia due to the package. The woman then became enraged, losing control so much so that she was asked to leave. Rosa was in the waiting room for a while, but after calming down, she returned. So Alexee's loved ones, who learned of the incident, gathered in the waiting room. In the whole time until the girl was released, none of them even inquired about the fate of the child. No one found out if he was alive, if he was all right, not even asked his sex. Neither the mother of the woman in labor, nor her boyfriend and his mother. In decades of experience, the experienced doctor had never seen such a reaction. It seemed the only concern was the opinion of the mother of the family, Rosa. Alexee thought only of not upsetting her mother. All of this indicated that the mother had a tremendous influence over her daughter. Doctors were also worried about young Alexee after she gave birth. The problem was that the placenta was missing. The woman in labor never revealed this secret. In the case of this kind of labor, the placenta could have remained inside, and this is an extremely dangerous condition that can cause profuse bleeding and even the death of the woman in labor. The girl was left in the hospital under observation and was persuaded to see the obstetrician again. She was to be properly examined and the remains of the placenta extracted, if indeed it had not come out. But during this time it was never found. The ultrasound showed it was missing. All this led to the unequivocal conclusion that Alexee had disposed of it in the toilet. During this period, the patient also had several conversations and doctor's examinations, but she still had no interest in the fate of her child. She literally did not care what became of him or where he would be buried. Doctors were again struck by Alexee's coldness. The hospital staff was also perplexed as to how Alexee gave birth to a rather large baby so quickly in a restroom where she didn't make a single sound. That happens quite rarely. It was hard to imagine what manipulation she was doing to make it all happen so quickly. After talking to the staff of the medical facility, the investigators turned to the woman in labor herself. It was not easy, since the mother interfered in every possible way and interfered with the actions of detectives from the very beginning of the investigation. They had to constantly remind the woman that they were not dealing with a teenager, but with a 19-year-old girl who is already considered an adult. The police officers needed to communicate with Alexee in private. To do this, the detective changed into a medical uniform and went in to see the patient in Rosa's absence. He told her that she needed to be as honest as possible in answering his questions, then repeated some of the ones that had been asked before. Key among them was the question about whether the baby had been breathing after birth. Alexee again told a story that investigators had heard before, pointing out that she didn't understand what came out of it, but unequivocally stated that he wasn't breathing. So, in her opinion, the infant was stillborn. Investigators were unable to get any useful information from either Alexee or her mother. Forensic experts later reported that the baby's umbilical cord was literally severed. Alexee didn't have any tools with her in the bathroom to cut it, so she literally tore it. The condition of the tissue was as if the girl had chewed it with her own teeth. Nevertheless, the placenta could not be found, although considering the birth of a premature child, it should have been quite large. Presumably, Alexee tore it into small pieces and then flushed them down the toilet. The nursing staff just heard numerous flushes in the toilet bowl. There were more than a dozen of them. An autopsy revealed that the newborn boy had no anatomical anomalies or obvious bodily injuries. At the time of birth, his lungs and heart functioned perfectly. It was not a stillbirth. Air was found in the infant's lungs, which means he had time to take his first breath at the time of death. The estimated age was 38 weeks. Forensic experts revealed the cause of death. The boy literally suffocated. Everything said that Alexee was a murderer by all legal criteria. On May 10, 2023, Alexee was charged with first-degree murder, as well as tampering with evidence to mislead the investigation. The prosecution saw all signs of premeditation in her actions. At the time of the girl's arrest, her mother was concerned only that the neighbors did not see it and did not know about the upcoming trial. However, on May 16th, Alexee was released from custody after bail in the amount of $100,000. The girl was allowed to finish high school while the trial was in progress. The terms of her release required her to obey a curfew after 7 p.m., but she was not required to be under house arrest or wear a GPS ankle bracelet. She was free to roam the city during authorized hours. The attorney emphasized that Trevizo had no legal problems or criminal record prior to that day. She was a diligent student and an athlete who held a respectable place on the school team. She sang in the choir. The girl graduated from high school, having successfully passed her exams, and also planned to continue her studies at the University of New Mexico. Alexee and her mother were increasingly attacked on the internet. The behavior of the teen's mother was condemned from all sides. However, the only thing the woman was worried about at the time the police contacted her was the possible repercussions for her. Alexee's trial is scheduled for October 2023. So far, she has not pleaded guilty to any of the charges. The prosecution is going to strategize by pointing out the blatant lies in the words of the mother and the birth mother. It has been established that she was on a large number of medications. While at the beginning of the pregnancy it was birth control, later on she started taking strong painkillers as well as weight loss products. The defense, on the other hand, revealed a whole set of irregularities in the work of medical staff, including that Alexee was given painkillers after arriving at the clinic, which could have caused the delivery and death of the baby. The defense attorney is going to use these points, shifting the blame to the medical staff, as well as using the breach of confidentiality of information and Alexee's glowing public image to get the defendant acquitted. Alexee's boyfriend, Davin, has not been charged. The trial in this case is ongoing. A knock on the staircase railing, the deafening echo of an empty house, and a scream piercing the air. It was a mother's scream, which still echoes in the mind of everyone who has heard the story. On that ill-fated evening, life in the Meyer home was divided into a before and an after. Megan, a smiling and shy girl who was only 3 weeks away from her 14th birthday, would never leave her room again. Her parents were busy minding their own business, discussing something in the kitchen while tragedy unfolded upstairs. All it took was a few cold, thoughtful sentences, written in the hand of someone they trusted. Behind the screen lurked a shadow, without a face, without a name, but with one intention: to destroy lives. They would later say it was a joke, that no one imagined it would go this far. But then, who will explain the tears on the cheeks of the girl who at the last moment changed her mind about dying, but could not change anything? The law enforcement authorities stubbornly refused to disclose the names of the suspects and kept the details of the investigation in strict secrecy. Nevertheless, curious journalists managed to get to the truth and revealed to the public who was behind the tragedy that took the life of 13-year-old Megan Meyer. Soon, the addresses and phone numbers of Lori Drew and her daughter Sarah surfaced online. Angry residents, having learned the bitter truth, were not going to limit themselves to condemnation. They seriously intended to raze the Drew family home to the ground. The situation heated up to the limit, and even the Meyers, who had lost their daughter, tried to contain the people's anger. Megan Meyer's story shocked the public. Under pressure from public opinion, and thanks to the persistence of the Meyer family, a new law was passed in 2009 to ban online stalking and harassment. This law, called the Megan Meyer Act, focused specifically on cases of adults bullying minors. Although the official justice failed to punish Lori Drew, the people sentenced her themselves. Public censure and boycott descended upon her, and her family became isolated. A house once full of life was now a symbol of how violent games on the internet can lead to tragedy, the echoes of which can still be heard today. Under the pressure of public scorn, Lori Drew had to quit her job. She could no longer bear the hostile stares of her co-workers. Hiding from threats, she decided to move, carefully disguising her new location. But even this was not enough. Her life hung in the balance because the revenge of angry citizens could take the harshest forms. Even Sarah, her daughter, had to change her name and still lives in constant fear. This whole nightmare also affected the Meyer family. Christine could not forgive herself for not keeping her daughter safe, and Ronald was unable to cope with the grief. Their marriage collapsed. Christine and her youngest daughter Allison moved to another city, and Ronald, lost and alone, makes ends meet and struggles with depression with the help of psychologists. His condition remains extremely unstable. In an interview, Christina recalled how on the day of Megan's death, she had to take off her hated braces. She had dreamed about it for years, but refused to go with her mother at that moment. Perhaps if she had been able to talk it out or just wait it out one more day, things might have turned out differently. but her decision was final. What led to such a tragic outcome? What could a young girl feel, caught in the grip of cruelty, which came not from the outside, but penetrated into her life through the screen? On the surface, everything seemed ordinary. School, friends, dreams, small teenage worries.
But behind that ordinariness was a slowly unfolding nightmare. Social media, where there should have been a place of joy and community, became a space full of ridicule and humiliation for Megan. Megan's days became filled with anxiety and despair, which at first looked like simple teenage sadness, but then turned into hopelessness.
A sense of loneliness overwhelmed her when even home was no longer a place of refuge from her pain. But within this tangle of secrets and lies something more sinister, a skillfully woven web that Megan failed to recognize. And now, we come to the sinister truth behind the impassioned nickname Josh Evans. Let's find out who was behind this account, and what were the intentions of those who pulled the strings, playing with the fate of a 13-year-old girl who had no idea of the betrayal. Megan Taylor Meyer was born on November 6, 1992, in the quiet town of O'Fallon, Missouri. At first glance, her life could be as quiet and measured as the town itself, but from an early age, the first cracks in her destiny began to show. She was the first child in the family of Christina and Ronald Meyer, and from the very beginning, her parents noticed something special in their daughter, which became more and more disturbing with each passing year. Already in elementary school, Megan could not fit into the usual framework. Her attention was scattered, she often could not concentrate, and suddenly broke into a screaming right in the classroom. This behavior did not fit the standards, and in the eyes of her peers, she quickly became strange and abnormal. As if caught in the crosshairs, the girl inevitably became an object of ridicule and humiliation. Behind her back whispered, and in the face threw hurtful nicknames that cut her fragile soul. Crazy, monster. These labels accompanied her everywhere, turning every day at school into an endless struggle. Studying was no relief either. If a subject didn't spark Megan's interest, her mind instantly shifted to other, more colorful and appealing thoughts. She tried desperately to connect with others, to become her own person, but every time she tried, she failed. Her playfulness and desire to see others happy often made her the target of cruel jokes. Those she tried to make laugh and win their approval only reinforced her isolation in return. As time went on, the situation got worse. In adolescence, when peer cruelty escalated, Megan found herself in the midst of bullying that was destroying her from the inside out. She was teased for everything from her appearance to the way she spoke. She saw only flaws in herself, and her self-esteem plummeted rapidly. For a shy girl who had always dreamed of acceptance and love, these taunts became a nightmare. Days turned into a series of humiliation and suffering. At the age of 11, driven to despair, Megan began to seriously consider suicide. Fortunately, at this point, she decided to confide in her mother, and she immediately sought help from specialists. The diagnosis sounded like a verdict: attention deficit disorder, deep depression caused by constant pressure and lack of support. Treatment helped ease Megan's suffering a little and gave her family the tools to support her, but the wounds caused by years of abuse could not fully heal. The pain inside her continued to smolder despite the best efforts of her loved ones. It was the story of a girl who dreamed of being accepted, but found herself alone with the cruelty of the world around her. Megan tried her best to survive the nightmare, but at every turn she met only cold indifference and contempt. She was left with only one question: how much longer could she take it? The bullying that Megan endured at school was not going to let up, despite her family's best efforts. It seemed like every new day was a challenge for this girl. But one day, in 2004, she had an unexpected change in her life. A new family moved into the neighborhood. With this move, Megan found not only a new neighbor, but also, as it seemed to her, the only real friend, a girl named Sarah Drew. Sarah, like Megan, faced the scorn of those around her. Being overweight made her an easy target for ridicule, and in that they were alike. Two girls labeled by society as different. Together, they felt less alone. Their friendship quickly developed into a close bond in which both found support and comfort. As teenagers should, they fought often, but reconciled even more quickly, as if nothing had happened. This bond proved to be a salvation for both, though it carried ominous shadows. Megan and Sarah's families also grew closer. Dinners, holidays together, and frequent visits to each other became routine. Megan cherished her hopes for a fresh start. The summer before high school started was a time of hope and faith in change for her. She shared her expectations with her mother and Sarah, imagining how things would change for the better. Megan was determined that she would no longer be that weird girl that everyone made fun of. She believed she had grown up and would finally be able to join the circle of popular girls she dreamed of being friends with. But the reality was much harsher. Already in the first weeks of the new school year, Megan again became a target for cruel ridicule. School turned out to be the same battlefield, only with new forms of humiliation. Classmates this time focused their anger on her appearance. Overweight and braces became an inexhaustible source of mockery for them. Every lunch period was a torture for Megan, with the girls in her class making cow-like sounds, accompanied by sarcastic comments. Cruel words, jokes, and bullying accompanied her everywhere. Every day began and ended in tears, and Megan's mood swung from hope to utter despair. She began to see school as a cage with no way out. At the end of the school year, Megan desperately told her parents that she didn't want to go back. Seeing the rapid deterioration of her mental state, her parents decided that the solution would be a new school, a closed Christian institution where strict order and discipline reigned. The new school was known for its impeccable reputation. It was attended by children from religious and intelligent families. Her parents believed that in this safe environment, their daughter would find peace and relief from the bullying that plagued her. But sometimes, when you try to run away from monsters, they only follow you, changing masks and approaches. Megan's well-intentioned parents didn't know that this new phase could also lead to even more horrifying consequences. The summer of 2006 was a time of hope and change for the Meyer family. Megan's parents signed documents to transfer their daughter to a new Christian school, where they believed the girl would finally find peace of mind and make friends. And at first glance, their expectations were met. In this educational institution, 13-year-old Megan as if breathed a breath of fresh air. No one was laughing behind her back or whispering in the hallways. On the contrary, from the very first day, she was surrounded by new classmates, sincerely interested in her, asking questions, joking. In just a few months, Megan not only made friends, but also joined the school volleyball team. She felt happy for the first time in a long time, as if the black streak in her life was finally over. However, with new friends came new changes. Megan began to distance herself from Sarah Drew, the friend who had been her only support for a long time. Now her days were occupied with socializing with new acquaintances, and Sarah gradually moved to the background. Meanwhile, a new craze was taking over the teenage world, the social networking site MySpace. For Megan, this became a real challenge. All of her new company already had accounts on this network, discussing the latest posts and sharing memes. When friends suggested that Megan add them as friends, she suddenly realized that she herself was not yet registered. How to explain to these cool guys that she still didn't have a profile? That question kept her in suspense. That same evening, Megan resolutely approached her parents. Why does everyone else have one and I don't? How am I any worse than anyone else? Her parents realized that isolation from her peers could drive their daughter back into depression. So after discussion, they agreed, but on their terms. Christina, always cautious and anxious, insisted on complete control. The password to the page was kept only with her and Ronald. Every time Megan wanted to log into her profile, she had to ask her parents for the password. Tight control was the price of admission to this new virtual world. Christina prepared thoroughly before allowing her daughter to enter the online space. She told Megan about all sorts of dangers, scams, viruses, fake profiles. The internet, in her opinion, was full of hidden threats. Behind every cute photo, there could be anyone hiding, she insisted. But to Megan, these cautions only sounded like boring stories. She needed one thing, to keep up with her new friends and be on topic. Her world was finally starting to take on bright colors, but no one guessed that shadows had begun to thicken where she least expected. The delicate balance between the desire to be accepted and the dangers of the new virtual world began to be disturbed. What lurked behind innocent requests to add friends and innocuous likes? Megan was soon to learn that even in the seemingly safest of places, real monsters lurked. Megan had sincerely promised her mother that she would be as careful as possible. Moreover, she herself had suggested that her mother could monitor all her messages to make sure nothing dangerous was going on. The most important condition was that Christina would decide who could be added as friends and who could not. These words reassured the worried mother. That evening, Megan anxiously created her first MySpace account. Shortly after setting up her profile, a request to be added as a friend popped up on the screen. It was a handsome young man named Josh Evans, 16, with a charming smile in his picture. In his profile, he indicated that he was moving to the city where Megan lives soon and wanted to meet new people beforehand. His first message was simple, but evoked a wave of emotion from Megan. "You're really cute." Megan showed her mother's profile with bated breath. Christina was wary of the stranger at first, but under the pressure of her daughter begging and beaming with happiness, she finally agreed. Megan was in seventh heaven. Megan had never attracted the attention of guys up until that point, and now she was literally glowing with joy. This perfect guy was coming into her life more and more each day. He told her about his hobbies, playing guitar and drums, his passion for rock and roll. And then he shared his difficult story. At the age of 7, his father left the family, and his mom had to struggle to provide for them. Megan was touched by this. She felt she had found someone who understood her, even if they had never met in reality. For her, Josh was like a prince from a dream. They spent hours texting each other, sharing their thoughts and experiences. Josh skillfully boosted her self-esteem, telling her she was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. It made Megan soar above the ground, forgetting about her complexes and the ridicule she had put up with for years. She couldn't wait for the school day to end so she could go home and get online as soon as possible, because the man who had given her so much happiness was waiting for her there. But behind this perfect scenario was a dark shadow that neither Megan nor her parents could see. A seemingly ordinary teenage romance began to turn into something sinister. Josh was becoming Megan's only source of joy, her refuge. She trusted him with all her secrets, while this prince masterfully manipulated her emotions, tailoring every message to maximize her trust. Something evil was already looming over the naive girl, but she was too blinded by the illusion of happiness to notice. Everything looked fine, but something unsettling was beginning to seep through that illusory peace. Josh, who had become practically everything to Megan, continued to avoid actually meeting her. Months of communication, and he'd never once offered to see her in person. He claimed he was homeschooled and therefore not attending school. Video calls? No. He doesn't have a good camera. Phone calls? No way. He just doesn't have a phone at home, he said. Walking? He explained it this way. He's too embarrassed to go out with a pretty and sweet girl like Megan. Any reasonable mother would have suspected something wrong, and Christina Meyer was no exception. But seeing how happy her daughter was, how her depressed mood was replaced by joy, she turned a blind eye to these obvious oddities. Christine comforted herself with the fact that Josh showed no warning signs. He didn't ask for private meetings, didn't demand candid photos, and communicated in a sweet and friendly manner. It all seemed like a harmless teenage hobby, and the mother let her daughter enjoy the new experience, believing there was no real threat here. Megan's father, Ronald, also saw that their daughter's life was starting to get better. The girl, who had previously been oppressed by ridicule and loneliness, now felt confident at school, enjoyed her new friends, and even improved her grades. By mid-October 2006, Megan was literally floating on wings. She was preparing for her 14th birthday, and for the first time in her life, she was sure that the party would be a success. Her parents had carefully planned a party that would bring together all of her new friends. It meant everything to Megan. For the first time, she could invite someone from school instead of settling for just boring family gatherings. This was her chance to prove that she was no longer the weird girl she'd always been thought of as. Everything was working out perfectly. On October 16, 2006, Megan was in a particularly rosy mood. She'd handed out invitation cards to her classmates at school, imagining how much fun it would be. But one figure from the past wasn't among the invitees, Sarah Drew, the same girl who had once been her best friend. Their paths had diverged, and now Megan didn't feel the need to keep in touch with those left behind. After all, now she had new friends, new goals, and a new life where everything seemed to be finally going right. But behind that bright facade, a dark shadow was already lurking. Megan hadn't yet realized that this Josh Evans and his kind words hid something creepy. Every day, the noose skillfully woven in the online world tightened tighter and tighter. When Megan got home, there was only one idea on her mind: inviting Josh to the upcoming party. She was sure that this mysterious guy who was giving her so much attention wouldn't be able to refuse a live meeting. As soon as the door slammed shut behind her mother and younger sister, Megan rushed to the computer. Her mind was spinning with rainbow thoughts of what a wonderful time they would have. But everything changed in an instant. As soon as she logged into her account, Megan noticed a message from Josh. It was nothing like his earlier gentle words. "I'm not sure I want to be friends with you. People say you don't like your friends." The words stabbed like a cold knife in the back. Where had that come from? Who could have vilified her like that? Doubt and anxiety replaced joy in a flash. No sooner had she recovered from the shock than a flood of new messages descended upon her. Josh, that seemingly perfect boyfriend, had suddenly turned into a cruel taunter. He posted her private messages that she had trusted only to him, and those messages were immediately shared with all of her former classmates. Megan felt the world crumbling around her again. Those who had once bullied her at school were now gathered in one virtual place like a pack of hungry wolves. The comments came one after another. "Fatty! No one wants you!" Her heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. When Christina got home, she immediately heard crying. Megan was sitting in front of the monitor, drowning in tears. "Mom, they're all texting me nasty things. It's just awful!" Through sobs cried the girl. But Christina was already on the verge. She repeatedly warned her daughter to turn off the computer and stop this madness, but Megan did not listen. Seeing that the situation was getting out of control, her mother kicked her out of the room with harsh words and hurried to figure out what was going on. What she saw struck her to the core. Her daughter was desperately trying to argue with her abusers, responding to their vicious attacks. "You're my mom! At least you should be on my side!" Megan cried out in despair as her mother began to rebuke her for her carelessness and weakness. The girl, unable to withstand the pressure, rushed upstairs to her room, slamming the door with such force that a vibration rippled through the house. Megan was in a state of hysteria. The invisible monsters lurking behind the computer screens had caught up with her in her own sanctuary. These friends had turned out to be monsters, and now even her own home didn't seem like a safe place to her. Megan ran up the stairs, nearly colliding with her father. Ronald, noticing her crying face, tried to find out what was wrong. "They're writing horrible things about me, Daddy," was all she squeezed out. He, not realizing the depth of her distress, tried to calm his daughter by suggesting that she ignore her abusers. But Megan said nothing and ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. Usually at times like this, Christina would immediately follow her daughter to calm her down. But this time, something was different. Too much irritation had built up, and instead of supporting Megan, she decided to give her time to cool down. Ronald, not giving what was happening any serious thought, went into the kitchen. He and Christina began cooking dinner, discussing how difficult it was to raise children in a world full of digital threats. About 20 minutes passed. Suddenly, Christina froze, interrupting the conversation. An icy feeling swept over her inside that defied logic. Something terrible had happened. Without a word, she rushed upstairs to her daughter's room. This inexplicable impulse, like a premonition, drove her forward. Ronald, before he could even comprehend her behavior, heard a heart-rending cry from somewhere above, which made his heart ache. He rushed upstairs, where he found Christine, distraught with terror, in the hallway in front of the door to Megan's room. Once inside, he saw his daughter, her body hanging in a built-in closet, tied to a bar. In a panic, Ronald tried to pull her down, tearing the closet to shreds as if he could bring her back to life by sheer force of will. When her body was on the floor, He desperately began CPR, hoping a miracle would happen after all. Megan's tears, already motionless, glistened on her cheeks, a mute testament to her final pain. Megan Meyer didn't live to see her 14th birthday for just 3 weeks. At the hospital, the doctors only confirmed the worst. When Ronald returned home, in a fit of grief and despair, he decided to log into her MySpace account. What he saw there shocked him. The last message was from Josh. "Everyone in town knows what you're really like. No one wants you. You're a pathetic person, and everyone hates you. The world would be a better place without people like you." Megan replied to him, "People like you are the reason people like you could die." Ronald and Christina immediately tried to contact Josh, but his page had disappeared. The mysterious friend had vanished into digital space as if he never existed. The next day, news of the tragedy spread throughout the school, and the very kids who had insulted her online yesterday suddenly turned into sympathizers. Messages full of regret and condolences poured into the Meyer family, but it didn't matter to them anymore. They were broken, and the only thing that occupied their minds now was to find answers to the agonizing questions. Who was behind Josh's mask? And why had this nightmare become reality? Christina and Ronald, who had lost all hope, went to the police trying to find some answers. They passed on all the messages from the mysterious Josh Evans, hoping the investigation would lead them to the man who drove their daughter to despair. But the reality was much colder. The cops just threw up their hands, saying that online bullying and wishing death did not fall under the legal definition of a crime. However, it wasn't just this response that was shocking. It turned out that Josh Evans didn't exist at all. The profile was a fake, created for the sole purpose of trapping Megan. The investigation stalled, as if the intruder had vanished, leaving only a trail of pain and grief. Some time passed, and overcome with their pain, Christina and Ronald decided to visit Drew's family to tell Sarah, Megan's former best friend, about the tragedy in person. The adults spoke quietly, holding back tears as they shared memories of the girls' friendship. "Megan always spoke warmly of you," Christina said, feeling the words stick in her throat. Lori Drew, Sarah's mother, offered heartfelt condolences, seemingly genuinely sharing their grief. The families said their goodbyes, but a strange tension hung in the air. 6 weeks later, the Meyers received an unexpected phone call. A woman from their neighborhood, whom they hardly knew, said she had information about their daughter's death. Her daughter, Michelle, told her the gruesome truth. Josh Evans was a fictional character created by the neighbors. Lori Drew, the same woman who comforted them at the funeral, along with her daughter Sarah and a 19-year-old girl named Ashley Grills, created this fake profile. And their goal wasn't just cruel, it was sinister. They wanted to taunt Megan, to watch her break down. Sarah bragged about this prank to Michelle, unaware of how it would turn out. When word got out about Megan's death, Lori Drew called Michelle and ordered her to keep quiet. "Shut your mouth or you'll be sorry," were her words. For Christine and Ronald, this blow was like a dagger in the back. Those who had seemed friends, those who had stood by their side at the funeral, those who had known their daughter since childhood, were the ones who had pushed her into the abyss. Lori Drew, a mature, judicious woman, a mother who was involved on more than one occasion. How could she use her power and experience to ruin the life of a 13-year-old girl? This woman built Megan's trust and then destroyed her self-esteem in cold blood, leading to tragedy. Megan had spent time with Sarah and her family on more than one occasion, going on vacations with them. The Drews were aware of her depression, of the girl's fragile emotional state. Lori always seemed genuinely interested in her health, meeting Christina at the store or on the street. And behind her back, she wove her sinister web to strike at just the right moment. "I wish you a shitty ending to your worthless life." When the truth came to the surface, Drew's family didn't know how to deal with the wave of hate and judgment. They desperately tried to make amends by visiting Christina and Ronald, but Megan's grief-stricken parents wouldn't even let them on their doorstep. In Christina and Ronald's eyes, the Drews were no longer just neighbors. They were the epitome of betrayal. The Myers' house fell into a heavy silence, where pain, anger, and despair mingled. They could find no peace knowing that the men who had destroyed their family were still at large. Meanwhile, the police and FBI continued to investigate, but state laws were powerless over Lori Drew's actions. Technically, she had not broken the law. Cyberbullying was not yet clearly defined in the legal statutes. Lori Drew, feeling the ground slipping away from under her feet, began to defend herself, blaming it on 19-year-old Ashley Grills, claiming that she was the inspiration for the fake account. Lori tried to make herself look like a victim of manipulation, pointing to Ashley as the sole culprit. But Ashley proved to be less than cold-blooded. Consumed with guilt, she couldn't handle the psychological pressure and sought counseling. In the end, she agreed to testify against Lori in exchange for exemption from prosecution. When the case went to trial, the Mayer couple waited for justice, but received only a new blow. The court refused to press criminal charges against Lori Drew. All Christina and Ronald were offered was an administrative action that could have resulted in fines and community service. How could their daughter's life be valued with such paltry payback? Shocked but not broken, the Meyers decided to follow through. They launched a campaign to change federal law, demanding that cyberbullying be criminalized. In 2008, their efforts were successful. Cyberbullying was added to the U.S. Criminal Code. Lori Drew was brought back to justice, and a jury unanimously found her guilty of Megan Meyer's death. But hopes for justice were dashed when a federal court overturned the verdict, citing a lack of a crime. Lori Drew remained free, but the verdict sparked a wave of outrage across the country. Christina Meyer recalls that on the day her daughter decided to leave for good, Megan had one cherished wish: to get rid of the braces, which she hated with all her soul. This moment was for her a symbol of the beginning of a new life, free from complexes and ridicule. She had dreamed about it for years, but when the day of long-awaited release came, Megan suddenly refused to go to the orthodontist. Something heavy and dark was already hanging over her mind, and her mother's words about getting rid of her discomfort soon went unheard. That day, the clouds of doubt and pain finally clouded her mind. Perhaps if she had chosen to talk to her family or simply wait out the storm, tragedy might have been avoided. But Megan had made her choice to leave. However, Megan was not the only one who made that fateful decision. She did what she did, Christina says, but it was like someone handed her a loaded revolver and watched her pull the trigger. These words are filled with bitterness and resentment, because Megan didn't just leave on her own. She was forced into it, purposefully destroying her fragile psyche. After the death of her daughter, Christina, struggling with despair, did not shut herself in, but channeled her pain into concrete actions. She started the Megan Meyer Foundation with the goal of preventing and combating cyberbullying. "I can't bring my daughter back, but if I can save even one life, Megan didn't die in vain," Christina says firmly. The foundation has become a pillar and beacon for those who feel trapped in digital abuse. Christina believes that by turning her tragedy into a mission, she can shed light on the dire consequences of cyberbullying and protect those who can still be saved. On a November morning in 2000, the mutilated bodies of a newlywed couple were found in a quiet suburb of Dallas. The crime was so brutal that investigators had literally no doubt it was a massacre committed with cold blood and calculation. The circle of suspects was narrowed down to the cousin of one of the victims, Ivan Cantu, whose life after that turned into a never-ending nightmare. Evidence, witness statements, forensic tests. Everything seemed to scream his guilt. However, the deeper one digs into this story, the more questions arise. Why did the confessions of key witnesses seem so strained? Where did things appear in Cantu's house that, as it later turned out, could not have belonged to him at all? And most importantly, who could really have been behind the bloody murders? The final verdict came quickly: the death penalty. But even years later, Cantu was desperate to prove his innocence, despite the impending lethal injection. And when everyone had already accepted his fate, the unexpected intervention of a documentary filmmaker shook up the case, forcing a fresh look at the tragedy. What if the true culprit had remained at large all this time? What if, in the pursuit of justice, the system has been on the wrong track? There are more mysteries to this case than meets the eye. And the closer you get to the solution, the more clearly you feel the icy breath of inevitable tragedy On January 23, 2001, Yvonne Kant was charged with double murder. According to state law, such a crime inevitably carries the death penalty. On October 3rd of the same year, the trial began, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was heated to the max. The prosecution confidently relied on the testimony of Ivan's ex-girlfriend, Amy Butcher, and her brother Jeff, who claimed that the motive for the crime was a desire for revenge for the dismissal and the desire to seize the money and jewelry of his brother James. According to them, Ivan acted cold-bloodedly and calculatingly, planning every move. To support its case, the prosecution presented 34 witnesses, including experts from various fields of forensic science. The centerpiece of the case were the confessions of Amy and Jeff, whose testimony sounded like a pre-rehearsed play. Their details were frighteningly accurate, creating an image of Ivan as a ruthless criminal. However, Ivan's defense looked, to put it mildly, unconvincing. The lawyers did not present a single witness in his favor. And what is striking, the defense actually agreed with the prosecution, admitting Ivan's guilt. Allegedly, he attacked his cousin and killed his fiancée only because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, Ivan categorically denied his involvement. His eyes shone with a desperate determination to prove his innocence. He begged the court to allow him to testify as a witness, hoping for a chance to tell his truth, but was denied. The jury, in no uncertain terms, unanimously found him guilty, and the death sentence was passed. But Ivan's story did not end there. He was not going to wait obediently for his fate behind bars. His will to live and his desire to clear his name were adamant. Contrary to expectations, the execution was postponed twice, in 2004 and 2006, and in 2009, the appeals court finally confirmed the death sentence. Not giving up hope, Ivan filed a request for an independent forensic examination. He insisted on analyzing skin particles from under the victim's fingernails, arguing that this could shed light on who the perpetrator really was. He also demanded a re-examination of the car that had been found in the parking lot outside his apartment, assuring that the car could have left prints or footprints of the real perpetrator. But time was passing, and it seemed that the truth might have been buried with Ivan. Was he the victim of a monstrous mistake or a cold-blooded killer? The answer to this question still remains open. The story of Ivan Cantu is full of contradictions and mysteries. The questions that arose during the investigation remained unanswered. Was he really a cold-blooded criminal, or was he the victim of a miscarriage of justice? Many details still seem mysterious, and the motives for the crime blurred. To understand what really happened, one must go back to the beginning of this tragedy, to the fateful day that forever changed the lives of two young people whose names were forgotten behind the loud accusations. Ivan was supported not only by his loved ones, but also by influential figures, politicians, activists, and celebrities. Among those who publicly spoke in his defense were such celebrities as Jane Fonda, Martin Sheen, and Kim Kardashian. They called for a review of the case, pointing out its possible errors and the unfairness of the verdict. However, despite the loud statements and protests, Ivan's situation remained critical. His last hope was a pardon from the governor, but even that prospect seemed almost fantastic. Such cases were extremely rare in Texas. Pardons had been granted only 3 times in the past 50 years. With each new reprieve, it seemed that the chance of salvation was becoming more and more elusive. The question was urgent. Could someone break this deadly game? Or would Ivan remain just another victim of a system in which the truth was too often drowned in the intricacies of judicial intrigue and human prejudice? What really happened on that fateful day? How do these events relate to Ivan Cantu, and could he have been the one who committed this terrible crime? To make sense of it, we will have to delve into the details of the tragedy, which is still controversial and makes us doubt the obvious. Ivan Cantu, born June 14, 1973 in Dallas, grew up in a well-to-do family where he had no lack of material wealth. His childhood was peaceful, with his parents ensuring his education in the best schools. However, despite the support, after completing high school, Ivan saw no point in continuing his studies at a college or university. His goal was to find a prestigious job as soon as possible and support himself independently. His parents, of course, insisted on higher education, but Ivan was adamant. At the age of 20, Ivan hit the road with a musical group, acting as a sideman. He traveled around the country, enjoying the success and monetary rewards that touring brought. Soon, however, the routine life on wheels began to weigh on him, and Ivan decided to change course. Shifting his attention to the real estate market, he soon achieved impressive results. Working as a mortgage broker, he began earning six-figure sums and seemed to have found his calling. Despite his achievements, his life was not cloudless. The young and successful Ivan found himself ensnared in luxury and prosperity. His new life in a luxurious house with a new wife was studded with expensive cars and abundance. However, behind the facade of prosperity hid a dark side. Alcohol and illicit substances were slowly destroying him, making him unpredictable and violent. His wife soon discovered that Ivan had ties to criminal circles and began to suspect him of trafficking in illegal substances. These suspicions and a strained relationship led to their separation, which was the beginning of his downfall. After the breakup with his wife, Ivan found himself on the edge of the abyss. His career collapsed, his property was lost, and his addiction only aggravated his situation. Looking for a way out of the crisis, he enlisted in the Navy, hoping for a new beginning. But the harsh army life did not meet his expectations, and soon Ivan returned to civilian life, still in search of stability. His only way out was to return to his cousin James, who offered him temporary housing. Amy Kitchen and Jason Mosqueda were a couple who dreamed of a happy life and made plans for the future. Their fates crossed with Ivan, and this intersection became fatal. Cheerful and full of hope, they were drawn into a tragedy that changed everything. How could an ordinary conflict turn into such a nightmare? What really bonded Ivan to Amy and Jason? On December 2nd, 1977, Emmy Michelle Kitchen was born in Tarrant County, Texas. She was the youngest child in a family where her older brother Mark was already growing up. The only daughter in the family, she was surrounded by special attention and care from childhood. Her parents could not deny her anything and often spoiled her. Nevertheless, Emmy retained a warmth of heart and kindness. She was described as a friendly, responsible, and cheerful girl who was always eager to help others, despite her privileged position. After graduating from high school in 1996, Emmy decided to connect her life with medicine and went to university, choosing a faculty that matched her desire to help people. Her dream was not just to become a doctor, but to create something of her own, a clinic where patients would feel protected and understood. To do so, she moved to Denton County, closer to the university, ready to begin a new chapter of her life. It was during this period that Emmy met James Makita. Their acquaintance occurred at a party organized by mutual friends. Mutual sympathy quickly developed into a relationship. James was a native of Mexico who was born in 1973. He spent his childhood in his native country, but then moved to the United States, where he graduated from high school. Outwardly, he looked closed and a bit wordy, but this did not prevent him from being successful in business. James was engaged in mortgage activities and quickly enough opened his own agency. Despite his reticence, James was a family man, especially warm to his nephews, with whom he spent a lot of time playing video games and attending sporting events. Their relationship was dynamic, but this apparent harmony hid details that were not obvious to outsiders. Meeting James brought not only romance into Emmy's life, but also unexpected difficulties that ended up having a serious impact on her destiny. At first, it seemed that Emmy and James were two completely different universes colliding in a chaotic dance of fate. While Emmy was the soul of the company, whose charm attracted everyone around her, James remained an enigma, immersed in his own thoughts and secrets. But this apparent contrast only served to intensify their attraction. The spark of sympathy that arose between them quickly grew into a passionate and strong relationship. Gradually, they became inseparable, spending every spare moment together. Their families watched with satisfaction as the couple, despite their differences, found harmony and happiness in each other. By 1998, James had achieved significant success in his business, which allowed him to realize ambitious plans to purchase a luxurious home in the northern suburbs of Dallas. The move to the new home, made 2 years after their relationship began, symbolized a new phase in their lives. Although they were not yet officially married, the move was a sign of their serious intentions. Emmy was consumed with dreams of a lavish wedding. She envisioned a grand gala day filled with beauty and joy, followed by a cozy family hearth. She planned to devote herself to starting a family, having children and raising them, while James would continue to run his successful business. Against the backdrop of their stable financial situation and seeming prosperity, their lives seemed almost perfect. But beneath the layer of prosperity lurked dark corners that no one could have predicted. With each passing day, their relationship deepened, and it became increasingly clear that behind the beautiful facade of family life could be hidden cracks that could destroy their harmony. The shadows of the past and the uncharted depths of their souls were ready to spill out, and their ideal life soon began to show troubling portents that heralded tragic changes. Emmy and James's lives changed dramatically when Ivan Cantu came into their lives. This is the same young man who was James's cousin, and at the moment, he was struggling financially and struggling with problems in his personal life. Now he was in the right place at the right time. James, showing generosity and compassion, decided to offer Ivan a job at his mortgage agency in Dallas and allowed him to temporarily move into his home. At the time, Ivan was 26 years old and looking for a way out of a predicament that had proved insurmountable. Initially, their relationship seemed to be restored. They became close brothers again. However, the idyll was short-lived. In 2000, suddenly and without explanation, James kicked Ivan out of the house and fired him from his job. The reason, according to rumors, were suspicions about Ivan's connections with criminal circles. Despite this abrupt turnaround, the two managed to maintain a peaceful relationship, and it seemed that resentment was not a thing of the past. At this time, James and Emmy, full of happiness and love, were preparing for their wedding. James, 27, and his 22-year-old bride dreamed of a romantic vacation in the Bahamas. Upon returning from that trip, James presented Emmy with a sparkling diamond ring, which further strengthened their resolve to create a future together. Ivan, trying to start a new life, moved to Minnesota. Here he took a job with a mortgage company and worked part-time at a local restaurant. At this establishment, he met 23-year-old Emmy Butcher and her 21-year-old brother Jeff. A relationship began between Ivan and Emmy, which quickly developed. 2 months later, the couple decided to move to Dallas, near the home of James and Emmy Kitchen, who had already returned from their trip and were consumed with wedding preparations. But, as is so often the case in life, the clouds began to gather over this bright moment. Fate was preparing its trials, and soon all that seemed serene and harmonious was doomed to destruction. The changes that began with personal conflicts and personal tragedies would soon come crashing down on every aspect of their lives, leaving only consequences and shattered dreams. On November 3rd, 2000, on an evening that seemed simple and peaceful, James and Emmy went to dinner with Emmy's father. The awe-inspiring conversation about their future, careers, and plans to start a family was filled with laughter and joy. No one could have imagined that this dinner would be their last moment together. At about 10:30 p.m., satisfied with the warm atmosphere of the meeting, all three of them went home, planning to repeat this pleasant tradition soon. That evening did not portend any trouble. However, around 11 p.m. that evening, Emmy called her mother, informing her of an important meeting for the next day. However, she never showed up for the scheduled meeting. The next morning, her mother, feeling increasingly anxious, attempted to contact her daughter several times, but without success. Emmy usually always called back if she couldn't answer right away. But this time, the silence had lasted for hours. It was unusual and alarming. The situation became even more alarming when James, with whom Emmy had always kept in constant contact, also stopped contacting. The panic-stricken parents learned that James's relatives couldn't contact him either. All signs indicated that something extremely serious had happened. Shocked and worried, they went to the house where the newlyweds lived, but no one answered their knock on the door. James's car was parked in place, indicating his presence in the house. Soon, Emmy's mother contacted emergency services. Around 5:30 p.m., police arrived on the scene. Opening the door and entering the home revealed that the parents' fears were realized. The bodies of James and Emmy were discovered in the bedroom. James was lying on the bed, face up, and Emmy was on the floor, face down. Both had suffered fatal gunshot wounds. Police quickly determined that the deaths had occurred hours earlier. as the bodies showed obvious signs of rigor mortis. This tragedy came as a shock to all who knew the young couple. A quiet evening of dinner turned into a tragedy, leaving behind only questions and endless grief. When investigators arrived on the scene, they immediately noticed several disturbing details. The lack of signs of struggle and forced entry raised questions, especially since the door had already been broken into after police arrived on the scene. Relatives of the victims, who were the first to discover the tragedy, did not notice anything suspicious until law enforcement arrived. However, valuables were missing from the house, creating disturbing speculation about possible motives for the crime. The disappearance of Emmy's black Chevrolet Corvette convertible, James's expensive watch, and the diamond engagement ring given during their romantic trip left no doubt that the crime had a self-serving motive. These items, which totaled thousands of dollars in value, were clear signs that the perpetrator may have had a profit motive. The loved ones of the victims, shaken by the tragedy, could not understand who could have committed such a brutal crime. James and Emmy were known as honest and decent people who made plans for the future and had no criminal connections or addictions. Their lives were filled with dreams of family and career accomplishments. They were not known in a circle of people with whom they might have had conflicts, which only added to the misunderstanding of the motives for the crime. One of the detectives suggested that the perpetrator was probably from the victim's inner circle. He may have known them, had access to their home, or been let in by the owners themselves. The motive could have been old grudges or jealousy. The possibility of a random robbery cannot be ruled out, as the missing items were of considerable value. The perpetrator may have come for revenge, and having found opportunities for theft, took advantage of the situation. The investigation was faced with many versions and suspicions, but each of them opened a new facet of the tragedy. Soon began a complex and hard work to solve this brutal crime. Every piece of information was important and could be a clue. The investigation had to make sense of the complex web of versions and evidence left behind after the tragedy. An autopsy on James's body revealed that he had received a single aimed shot to the head, which instantly led to his death. Emmy's body, on the other hand, was struck by 4 bullets. Apparently, after the first shot, when she probably tried to run away, she was caught up on the floor next to the bed and was mercilessly shot. This evidence conclusively established that gunshot wounds were the cause of their deaths. No crime weapon was found at the scene, and no apparent suspects were identified. However, investigators' attention was soon drawn to information about Ivan Cantu's recent firing, provided by Emmy Kitchen's relatives. This news could have linked Ivan to the incident, especially since the couple had no obvious enemies. Ivan's caring mother, Sylvia, contacted the police a few hours after learning of the tragedy. The woman reported that she had been unable to get into her son's apartment and had noticed a bullet-like hole in the wall. She was deeply concerned because Ivan and his fiancée were on the road visiting her parents in Arkansas. Sylvia was terrified that her son might have encountered the same evil that James and Emmy had died. Detectives immediately went to the scene and found Emmy Kitchen's car parked next to the apartment complex. This circumstance suspiciously linked Ivan to the murder. A search warrant was soon obtained for Ivan's apartment. During the search, a bunch of keys to his cousin's house were found, as well as pants, shoes, and socks discarded in the kitchen trash can. These items had traces that looked suspiciously like blood, further complicating the situation. In addition, a box of ammunition was found in the apartment. While investigators continued to sort through the evidence, Ivan was in Arkansas. His mother was finally able to contact him and shared her concerns about the bullet hole in the wall. Despite the seriousness of what was happening, Ivan discussed these events with friends and remained remarkably calm, despite being aware of the police searches. Thus, the situation became more and more tense and confusing. Versions multiplied, and each new fact only added to the complex puzzle that the investigation had to solve. Ivan Cantu tried to justify himself by claiming that his life had become a nightmare after a man dressed as a pizza delivery man came to his house on November 2nd, a pizza he had not ordered. This uninvited guest, as it soon turned out, was an underworld acquaintance who demanded payment from Ivan for illegal drugs. Ivan sensed something wrong and, without opening the door, left it on a chain. Soon the conflict between them escalated, and the visitor, threatening serious consequences, promised more drastic measures if the debt was not repaid. 4 days later, on November 7th,
the same man returned and shot at the wall of Ivan's apartment to intimidate the debtor. After that, Ivan and his girlfriend, Amy Butcher, made the decision to leave town. After searching Ivan's apartment, when he and Amy returned to Dallas, they were stopped by police officers and taken to the station. The police, based on the evidence they had gathered, believed Ivan was responsible for the double murder. A .380 caliber semi-automatic pistol, which he always carried with him, was found at his cousin's house, where Ivan had lived for some time. This fact only added to the suspicion that he was involved in the crime. Ivan, despite everything, continued to insist on his innocence, claiming that the murders were the work of a criminal partner who was dissatisfied with Ivan's failure to pay him back. According to him, the man was trying to intimidate him into repaying his debt and soon began threatening him. However, investigators were puzzled by the question: why would the perpetrator want to kill Ivan's relatives and leave him himself alive? This aspect of the story seemed illogical and created doubts about the plausibility of Ivan's version. Further investigation revealed that Ivan's alleged criminal partner did have connections to the underworld and could have been a victim of a rival group. The man, dressed as a pizza delivery man, turned out to be a trafficker of illegal drugs whose business had crossed paths with Ivan. The trafficker, when detained, admitted his connection to crime, but did not report his actions immediately, fearing imprisonment for his illegal activities. His detention and lies only increased the investigation's suspicion of Ivan's guilt, emphasizing that the investigation was becoming increasingly convoluted and tense. The investigation escalated after a new hypothesis became known that the real culprit could have been another person. However, this hypothesis was quickly debunked by Amy Butcher. In a shocking confession made by the girl, she confirmed that her boyfriend, Ivan Cantu, confessed to her about the crime. According to her, this confession took place on the night of November 3rd, shortly after Ivan returned from the scene of the crime. Ivan told Emmy that he had traveled by car, relying on revenge against James. In his version, James had allegedly stolen several $1,000s from him and the illegal substances he was dealing. When Ivan returned home, he was bloody and his face was swollen, and his clothes were covered with suspicious red stains. At Emmy's direction, he threw the clothes into a bucket under the sink. The girl also noticed an expensive watch in Ivan's possession that matched the one missing from the victims. By the time Ivan returned to Dallas, he had asked Emmy to marry him and gave her a diamond ring, the exact same one that had gone missing from James's fiancée. Emmy was unable to provide the ring for analysis, as Ivan took it away shortly after their return. This ring likely represented important evidence that Ivan attempted to destroy, but his actions only added to the evidence against him. Jeff Butcher, Emmy's brother, also confirmed Ivan's confession. He told police that on the day of the crime, Ivan had personally told him about the crime and offered a cash reward for his help in cleaning up the crime scene. Jeff, afraid of becoming an accomplice, declined the offer. Investigators found a bunch of keys in Ivan's apartment that matched the locks in the victim's home. Ivan's fingerprints were found at the scene. Clothing found in a trash can in the kitchen was tested and was found to have traces of blood on them that matched the victim's DNA. The final blow to Ivan's version of events was struck by ballistics analysis. The gun found in James's home was used in the crime. The bullets recovered from the victims' bodies matched those found in Ivan's apartment. The characteristic marks on the bullets confirmed that the weapon used in the crime was unique, which finally tied Ivan to the crime scene. In the turmoil of the trials, covered in the pages of newspapers and on the evening news, on January 23, 2001, Ivan Cantu found himself in the spotlight as a double murder defendant. Texas state law was ruthless. Such a crime implied the inevitability of the death penalty. Already on October 3rd of that year, the trial began and attracted public and media attention. The prosecution team presented the testimony of Amy Butcher and her brother Jeff, who accused Ivan of a brutal crime, motivated by revenge for dismissal and lust for gain, money and jewelry. The prosecution brought in 34 witnesses, including forensic experts, to support its case. At the heart of the case were the confessions of Amy and Jeff, which formed a clear picture of the crime. Ivan Cantu insisted that his ex-fiancée's testimony was unreliable because of her dependence on illegal substances. He argued that at the time of the interrogation,
she was under the influence of illegal drugs and did not realize what she was saying. However, these arguments were rejected by the court, and the investigators said that the material collected for the examination was insufficient. In their opinion, this indicated that there was no struggle. The victims were killed lightning fast, without even having time to try to defend themselves. In addition, the car found at the scene of the crime had been thoroughly cleaned, which made it difficult to identify the traces. Despite Ivan's best efforts to get justice, his efforts seemed futile. The prosecutor's office would not reconsider the case, and Ivan himself continued to fight desperately for his release. His mother, Sylvia, never gave up hope and believed that her son could not be a criminal. His mother's support and loyalty to his cause became his only light in the tunnel. However, the turning point came in 2019 when television producer Matt Duff, who specializes in controversial death penalty cases, stumbled upon Ivan's story. Inspired by the story and his sense of injustice, he decided to dive into the details of the case. Matt was convinced that Ivan may have been the victim of a miscarriage of justice. After realizing that his journalistic experience was not enough for an in-depth investigation, he decided to get his private investigator's license to uncover the truth and provide a new perspective on a complex and mysterious case. Matt Duff's training in private detective investigation was his key to solving a case that had long remained in the shadows. Upon completion of the course, he broke standard confidentiality rules and began publicly covering the Ivan Cantu case through his podcast. Despite the lack of official hiring by Ivan's family or his attorneys, Matt decided that the truth deserved to be publicized. He funded his own investigation, driven by a desire to uncover the hidden aspects of the case. Not aiming to simply secure Ivan's release, Matt focused on finding the truth. He traveled frequently to Texas, interviewing witnesses and enlisting a former Dallas police officer to help him find Amy Butcher. The woman was an important figure, and her testimony could play a key role in solving the case. After many attempts, Matt managed to find Amy. Her testimony remained much the same as before, but new evidence had come to light that cast doubt on its credibility. Matt also noticed that Ivan's defense attorney was not doing a good job, which was also criticized. By 2020, Matt Duff analyzed 50 hours of interrogation notes and forensic materials reviewed by independent experts. He found that the materials clearly pointed to Ivan's possible non-involvement in the crime. He was particularly alarmed by the discovery of clothes and shoes in the trash garbage can of Ivan's apartment. The dimensions of the items did not match his own. However, it was still unclear how these items had ended up in Ivan's apartment and what this could mean for the case. The Rolex watches listed among the missing items were only found many years later in the victim's home. They were identified by a unique name engraving. There were also questions about a diamond ring that was given to James's fiancée on the day of their deaths. Witnesses claimed that she had been wearing the ring even before the crime, casting doubt on the claims of it being in Ivan Cantu's possession. Matt Duff continued the investigation, discovering that key prosecution witnesses were under the influence of illegal substances at the time of their testimony. These new circumstances, while significant, were not decisive in court. Nevertheless, the producer did not give up. He created a public outcry, gathering activists from Texas who supported the version of Ivan's innocence. Among the supporters were even representatives of the Catholic Church who saw injustice in the case. Under the influence of public pressure, a petition was organized, which collected 80,000 signatures sent to the chief prosecutor of the state. Matt Duff was able to convince some of the former supporters of the prosecution that there may have been a miscarriage of justice. As a result, there was real hope for a review of Ivan Cantu's case and his eventual release. On April 26, 2023, the time was set for a new trial. A few days before the hearing, Ivan reasserted his innocence, arguing that he could not accept death for a crime he had not committed. In an interview, he spoke of the fear that has haunted him for 22 years. The fear that his life could be ended by lethal injection before he could prove his innocence. Ivan continued to insist that the investigation of his case was far from fair. He claimed that the law enforcement agencies ignored any version other than the one in which he was the perpetrator. Despite his complicated history with the criminal world, which nearly took his life, Ivan assured that he had not committed a crime that could justify the death penalty. Allegations made by his former girlfriend, Amy Butcher, were also the subject of his anger. Ivan claimed that Emmy was motivated by revenge and that her testimony was nothing more than malicious slander. Sadly, Emmy passed away in 2021, leaving her words an unsolved mystery, adding further gravity to this confusing case. The investigation soon uncovered many irregularities. Evidence was fitted to an already cooked result, and the dates of the crimes turned out to be incorrect. In fact, the murders were committed on the morning of November 4th, 2000, while Ivan was in Arkansas with his girlfriend, which completely disproved the allegations against him. By 2022, the situation had become even more complicated. Emmy Butcher's brother, Jeff, unexpectedly recanted his testimony, giving Ivan's defenders a new trump card in the fight for justice. However, despite their best efforts and carefully prepared evidence, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied the request for a retrial. Much evidence went unreviewed and the death sentence was upheld. A new execution date was set for February 28, 2024, but this too had to be postponed, leaving Ivan in a state of uncertainty and fear for his future. On that grim day, just hours after his lawyer failed to get through to the authorities with final requests for a review of the case, Ivan was sent to his death. His mother, Sylvia, in desperation, gathered a group of friends and activists outside the prison, where protesters, holding placards and chanting slogans, tried desperately to draw attention to the case. But their efforts proved futile, and their appeals went unanswered. In his last words, Ivan again insisted on his innocence. He addressed the families of the victims, stating that despite all the conflicts, he could not be responsible for the death of his cousin and his fiancée. He expressed his love for them, even in such difficult times, and argued that his conflicting feelings could not be the cause of such a horrible crime. Ivan devoted his last moments before his execution to thanking those who had fought for his cause, even though justice had not been served. In that tragic moment, he left behind not only the memory of his struggle, but also the silent questions about justice and human destiny that would plague his cause and those who believed in it. Ivan Cantu was eventually executed in Texas on February 28, 2024, becoming the first inmate executed that year. The Alexee family tragedy. What drove a devoted family man to the brink? How can one identify a psychopath? Let's delve into what this term encompasses. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by distinctive traits such as a lack of empathy and compassion, emotional shallowness, egocentrism, and a deceitful charm. While not an exhaustive list, these qualities are commonly observed in psychopaths. Such individuals are adept at adapting, skillfully manipulating those around them, and expertly concealing their true nature, often to the extent that even those closest to them may not recognize the potential danger. The Alexee family's story serves as a chilling reminder that someone perceived as a loving and close family member can suddenly morph into a remorseless perpetrator, sparing not even their own children. The man's behavior and his stated motives for committing such a heinous act were so alarming and shocking that they raised questions about his sanity. Yet, to everyone's astonishment, a psychiatric evaluation revealed that he was fully aware of his actions and had premeditated the horrific crime. This case shook Italy to its core, particularly the serene province of Visconti, where this tragedy unfolded, marking it as the most notorious crime in the small Milanese suburb's history. Now, let's methodically unravel this story and attempt to trace the sequence of events that led to such a tragic conclusion. The tragedy in Visconti. In the early hours of Saturday, June 14, 2014, the quiet town of Visconti was awakened by the desperate cries of a man. Peering out their windows, residents saw their neighbor, 31-year-old Carlo Lissi, calling for help. He appeared frightened and disoriented, mumbling incoherently, and pleading for someone to call the police. As people from nearby homes gathered, Carlo revealed that his entire family had been victimized by intruders who had broken into their home, while he had miraculously survived because he was out with friends at a local sports bar, watching the soccer match between Italy and England. He mentioned that everything seemed normal when he left his house earlier that night, but upon returning, he found his home in disarray and the lifeless bodies of his 38-year-old wife, Christina, their 5-year-old daughter, and their 1.5-year-old son. Neighbors immediately called the police and emergency medical services. While waiting for them to arrive, The operator asked Carlo to check if any of his family members had a pulse and to possibly start CPR if there were any signs of life. To this, he screamed that he wouldn't step inside his house again or touch the bodies. While his behavior could be attributed to shock, it was peculiar that he referred to his family members as bodies, even before confirming their demise. Carlo's odd behavior didn't stop there. When police and medical personnel arrived and confirmed the deaths of his wife and children, he barely reacted. He attempted to cry but only managed contorted facial expressions, with his eyes remaining dry and his face almost indifferent. He struggled to recall the sequence of his actions, gave conflicting statements, but claimed to have recorded the moment he discovered the bodies on his phone's camera. He believed the recording would prove his innocence, but it turned out to be one of the main pieces of evidence against him, among many others. This was the beginning of a high-profile case that was quickly solved. The robbery narrative, strongly advocated by Alexee, was dismissed within hours of the investigation, and he became the prime suspect. As the police uncovered more physical evidence at the scene of the crime and interacted further with Carlo, doubts about his mental health began to emerge. Who was Christina Alexee? Let's start this narrative by introducing its main characters. Christina Alexee, born Christina Omas, came into the world on September 17, 1975, in the small northern Italian town of Pavia, becoming the eldest child in her family. From a young age, she exhibited a strong-willed, independent, and highly ambitious nature, always marching to the beat of her own drum. She possessed leadership qualities and was constantly striving to excel in whatever she undertook, whether it was her schoolwork, performances in the drama club, or any day-to-day activities. Christina was someone who always had a wide circle of friends, thanks to her excellent organizational skills and the ability to lead. After finishing high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Milan and soon moved out of her parents' home to start an independent life. Despite this, she maintained a close relationship with her family, staying in constant touch, and her parents knew they could always rely on their eldest daughter. At the age of 19, while still attending university, Christina took a job at a branch of a major Italian insurance company located in Motta Visconti. She quickly earned the respect of her superiors and colleagues, and her career was on a fast track to success. Upon graduation, she had a wide array of opportunities before her, but instead of moving to a big city, Omas chose to stay closer to home in the countryside. By this time, she had already received a promotion at work and assumed a managerial position, becoming a leading specialist in the field of civil insurance. However, even as she grew into an adult and a successful woman, Christina never gave up her youthful passion for theater. She dedicated all her spare time to rehearsals and performing on stage, particularly enjoying musical productions due to her strong voice and impeccable musical ear. In Motta Visconti, she had her admirers and was sometimes even recognized on the streets. Yet Christina's personal life didn't seem to fall into place as smoothly. She had many suitors and occasional romances, but most of the men she encountered seemed frivolous, unreliable, and unsuitable for a serious relationship or family life. She held on to the belief that she would eventually find her true love and achieve happiness. Carlo Alexee, the unassuming psychopath. Carlo Alexee entered the world in the fall of 1982 in the Italian commune of Casarano as the eldest of two sons in his family. The family patriarch held conservative views, was quite strict, and even harsh with his children. Carlo's younger brother quickly became the parents' darling, constantly pampered and protected, while they demanded unquestioning obedience, stellar academic performance, and high achievements from their firstborn. From childhood, Carlo strived to meet his parents' expectations, always acting as instructed. He excelled academically, participated in volleyball, a sport his father chose for him despite Carlo's passion for soccer, and never argued with his father, who often stated that his house operated solely on his rules. It was easy to upset or anger their father, who became terrifying when enraged, so Carlo made it a point never to contradict him, always enviously observing his father's and mother's more affectionate treatment towards his younger brother. As a teenager, Carlo became nervous and withdrawn, dreaming of doing something on his own, yet fearing his father's wrath. His fears, internal struggles, and self-doubt affected his relationships with peers. Carlo had almost no friends at school, where he was seen as an uninteresting nerd, often openly bullied without the ability to defend himself, as his father had crushed his self-esteem and suppressed any desire to assert himself. Over time, Carlo learned to adapt and blend in. He avoided conflicts, tried to merge with the crowd, and was superficially polite and kind, even to those he despised. It seemed Carlo had lost his own emotions, or perhaps never had them, laughing or mourning with others. But his emotional responses always remained shallow because he never truly felt those emotions. Another trait of Carlo was his skill in dodging uncomfortable questions. He wasn't a pathological liar, but knew how to prevaricate and evade with such an impassive demeanor that it seemed he was speaking the truth. People who knew Carlo personally later recalled his diminished capacity for empathy. He could be described as callous and indifferent to the troubles and sorrows of others, including those close to him. After finishing school, Alexee enrolled in a prestigious university's economics faculty, chosen by his father, despite Carlo's disinterest in economics or working with numbers. But his opinion was never sought, and he couldn't challenge his father's decision. Thus, Carlo was accustomed to acting against his own interests just to meet others' expectations. Carlo was quite handsome and knew how to use it to his advantage. His youthful sports activities and regular gym visits in adulthood made him even more attractive. Coupled with some charm and superficial charisma, Carlo could be described as a real looker with a dazzling smile and athletic build. People often admired his looks, leading to excessive self-love and clinical narcissism. Alexee easily initiated flings with women, but was incapable of engaging in serious, long-term relationships. First, he tried to avoid any responsibility. Second, he had no interest in making long-term plans, simply going with the flow. And third, his partners soon realized he was emotionally shallow and devoid of real attachment, leading them often to initiate the breakup. Even after university, the young man continued living with his parents, showing no desire to start an independent life, let alone a family of his own. Meanwhile, he secured a job at a leading IT company in Milan. Carlo earned a good salary and faced broad prospects but remained dissatisfied with his career. However, his parents were overjoyed, and his father seemed proud of his eldest son for the first time, so Carlo was too afraid to disappoint him, preferring to avoid conflicts and criticism. But soon, a good job and career achievements weren't enough. His parents increasingly pressured him to marry and provide them with grandchildren. Aware of his numerous fleeting affairs and his inability to maintain serious relationships, these discussions often led to arguments at home. As Carlo always tried to avoid confrontations, he assured them he would soon find a wife and start a family. Carlo and Cristina Alexee, a love story. Carlo first laid eyes on Cristina during her performance in a musical play on stage, where he was utterly captivated by her powerful charisma and stunning vocal talent. Despite his immediate fascination, he lacked the courage to approach her after the show. However, fate intervened a few weeks later when mutual friends introduced them. At the time of their meeting, Carlo was only 23, while Cristina had already turned 30. Despite the significant age difference, they quickly developed a romantic relationship. Cristina, who had previously focused mainly on her career, found herself unexpectedly wanting to build a family and have children with Carlo. He was handsome, career-oriented, and intelligent. Cristina perceived his hesitancy, dependency, noticeable selfishness, and some emotional coldness as traits that could be mended. She took the initiative in their relationship, with Carlo compliantly following her lead. Just a few months into the relationship, Omas introduced Carlo to her family. Cristina's parents, however, were not pleased with her choice. They saw her suitor as frivolous, with Cristina's mother describing him as a child in a man's body. She believed her daughter needed a more emotionally mature partner who could be a reliable support, not this immature young man. Cristina, however, disagreed and decided to follow her heart, as she always had. Conversely, Carlo's parents were thrilled with his choice. Cristina was seen as an adult, wise, self-sufficient, and accomplished woman who could take care of herself and their indecisive, somewhat irresponsible son. The head of the family, who was not easily pleased, was particularly delighted, convincing Carlo further that he had made the right decision. In quiet waters. About a year after meeting, the young couple moved in together and started actively planning their wedding. Carlo was quiet and compliant, always listening to his fiancée, never contradicting her, and carefully avoiding domestic disputes. Christina made all the decisions while her chosen partner silently supported them. This arrangement suited her perfectly. She was confident that a long and happy life awaited them. However, just before their wedding, Carlo revealed his true nature for the first time, nearly causing them to split. Before the wedding, Carlo's friends threw him a bachelor party in one of Milan's popular nightclubs. They drank, had fun, and were having a great time when a group of women joined them. One of them showed a keen interest in the groom-to-be, trying her best to seduce him. His inebriated friends immediately egged him on, suggesting that a fleeting affair with the stranger would be the perfect adventure to bid farewell to his bachelor life. Without much thought, the guy went off to a hotel with the woman, where they spent a passionate night. The next morning, unexpectedly, Carlo confessed his love to the casual lover and promised to leave his fiancée for her. That same day, he confessed everything to Christina, stating he had fallen for someone else and no longer wanted the wedding. Christina handled the news with dignity, packed her belongings, and decided to move back to her parents' house temporarily while finding her own place. But when Carlo's father learned about his son's actions and that the engagement with Christina was broken off by his initiative, he was furious. He declared he didn't want to see his heir until he apologized to the bride-to-be and convinced her to marry him again. Once again, Carlo submitted to his father's will. After buying a huge bouquet of flowers, he headed to the Omas residence. Christina's parents opposed him. They had disliked this peculiar young man even before the news of his infidelity and the broken engagement, and now they certainly didn't want to see him. But the final decision was Christina's to make. After some thought, she decided to forgive her fiancé and give him another chance. The wedding and Mr. Lissy's double life. The wedding took place as planned, and the money gifted by relatives was invested in buying their own home in Monte Visconti. Initially, their marital life seemed quite blissful. Both held high-ranking positions with substantial salaries, affording them not just the necessities but also travel, entertainment, and more. In 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Julia, and in 2013, Christina gave birth to a son, Gabriel. To the outside world, they appeared as a happy family, full of love and understanding. Carlo seemed to do everything to please his wife, not out of deep love or respect, but rather to avoid disputes. Christina was content with their life together, oblivious to the double life her husband led. At home, he was the exemplary family man, spending time with his wife and kids. Yet, in Milan, where Carlo commuted daily for work, he transformed entirely. He frequently engaged in flings and casual encounters, meeting women in cafes, shopping centers, or even on the street. The handsome, stylishly dressed man in his expensive car almost always received reciprocated interest. But these affairs typically ended after a few dates. Carlo enjoyed the control and dominance in these short-term relationships, deciding when to see his next conquest and when to leave her. At home, Christina held the reins, with Carlo merely following her lead. However, rumors of his escapades eventually reached Christina. Each time she confronted him, Carlo swore it was all lies and slander. In 2013, shortly after the birth of their second child, Carlo seriously considered leaving his family for one of his mistresses, to the point of admitting his intentions to his wife. Christina countered with compelling arguments against their separation, particularly highlighting how it would upset his parents. Carlo had no choice but to concede to her reasoning. New love and a horrific plan to escape marital ties. A year later, in early 2014, a new employee named Maria, young and attractive, joined Carlo's workplace. He fell for her instantly, unable to think of anyone else. He tried everything to catch her attention, giving small gifts, complimenting her, and asking her out repeatedly. However, Maria was clear about not wanting to engage with a married co-worker who had 2 children. But Carlo, persistent in his pursuit, seemed to ignore her protests and didn't think of giving up. Moreover, Carlo began to blame his family for his unhappiness, believing his wife and children were obstacles to his personal joy. He convinced himself he had never been happy in his marriage, or in life for that matter. But with Maria, he imagined he could have the perfect relationship. If only he wasn't bound by his marital ties and responsibilities as a father. The more he dwelled on this thought, the darker his contemplations became. Carlo broached the subject of divorce again, but his wife once more convinced him it was a bad idea, and he found no arguments to counter hers. Frustrated, he started looking online for divorce lawyers, but realized after a few consultations that he would have to surrender half of his assets to Christina and also pay child support. Unwilling to accept such an outcome, he began researching how to end a person's life quickly and without arousing suspicion. Delving into various criminal stories, Carlo stumbled upon an article about an armed robbery that had occurred a few years prior in Monte Visconti. The robbers had fatally stabbed the homeowner before fleeing with the loot, remaining undetected to this day. A monstrous plan took shape in Carlo's mind to recreate a similar robbery scenario, but this time, the intended victims would be the mother and children. For months, he meticulously studied human anatomy and cold weapons, ensuring his planned actions would leave no chance for survival for the condemned family members. During this period, Carlo transformed into the model husband and father, showering his wife and children with warmth and care they had never received from him before. Christina was overjoyed, thinking her husband had matured, unaware that he had doomed her and the children to a tragic fate. The last day of the Lissi family. The final day for Christina and her children was Friday, June 13th, 2014. Carlo, having the day off, spent it with his family, orchestrating a sort of farewell celebration. They visited an amusement park together, went shopping at a mall, and ended the evening at a popular local cafe. Carlo made sure they were seen by as many people as possible to demonstrate their apparent happiness. Returning home, the couple put their children to bed upstairs and then went downstairs to the living room where they were intimate. This was part of Carlo's sinister plan to divert suspicion from himself. He knew that an examination would confirm mutual consent, leading no one to suspect that he would suddenly end the lives of his wife and children. Christina, aware that her husband planned to watch football with friends, thought he was getting dressed, while she settled in the living room by the TV. Meanwhile, Carlo went to the kitchen, grabbed a large knife, and stealthily approached Christina from behind. He struck her on the side of the neck, but Christina remained conscious and attempted to flee. It seemed she didn't immediately realize who her attacker was. Upon seeing her enraged husband with the knife, she was utterly shocked. She tried to defend herself and knocked the knife away, causing Carlo to slip and injure his palm. Despite her efforts, the strength disparity was too great. Carlo continued his assault until Christina showed no signs of life. She died without understanding why her loved one could commit such a horrific act. Then, Carlo went upstairs and cut the throats of his sleeping 5-year-old daughter and his 18-month-old son. Experts later concluded that the children likely did not suffer and probably didn't even wake up. Neighbors, some of whom heard loud screams, did not call the police, thinking the noise quickly subsided. Had they been more vigilant, the children's lives might have been saved. After completing the deed, Carlo clumsily staged a robbery, slightly moving and scattering items, erased his fingerprints from the weapon, cleaned the floor where he had stepped in fresh blood, and then went to a rarely used basement shower to wash off the blood. However, he inexplicably put back on the same underwear, which had small blood splatters unnoticed by him in the moment of the attack. Following this, the perpetrator bandaged his cut hand, dressed up, and casually went to a sports bar to watch football and drink beer with friends. He behaved naturally, and his friends, later testifying in court, could not fathom that he had just committed a triple homicide against his own family. Towards the end of the match, Carlo sent a couple of messages to his wife's phone, updating her on the score and professing his love, adding that he would be home soon. He returned around 3 a.m. and staged a dramatic discovery of the crime, making several critical mistakes. Firstly, he recorded the scene on his phone's camera, intending to create an alibi by pretending to discover the disorder and then the body of his wife, before running outside in panic. His second mistake was failing to turn off the camera, resulting in footage that completely contradicted his alibi and testimony. Investigation and evidence. Carlo's initial claim of a robbery was quickly dismissed in the early hours of the investigation, following the crime scene examination. Doors and windows were intact, indicating that the perpetrator had unrestricted access to the house. Nothing of value nor anything at all was missing despite money and Christina's jewelry box being in plain sight. The disorder appeared staged, with items merely toppled or displaced rather than searched through. Most importantly, there was no logical reason for robbers to harm the children sleeping upstairs in their beds. Thus, the case was swiftly reclassified as a deliberate act of ending lives. Carlo, becoming the prime suspect immediately, gave inconsistent statements and couldn't clearly explain the fresh cut on his palm. When he was taken into custody and his clothing was sent for analysis, experts quickly found tiny blood splatters on them. However, Carlo claimed the blood must have come from when he attempted to revive his family members. Yet the stains were too small and located on the back of his clothing, suggesting they could only have originated from the knife's motion during the act. Regarding the video Carlo provided to the authorities, it clearly showed that he didn't approach his wife's body to check for a pulse or go upstairs to the children, but ran outside immediately and didn't return. Despite this, he claimed his family was no longer alive and knew for certain all three were ended with a knife. The discovery of a bloodied cloth in the trash, which the culprit used to clean up, was the final piece of damning evidence. The psychopath's rationality. After his arrest, Carlo ceased all pretenses of grief. He became calm and indifferent, simply going to sleep once placed in his cell. He showed no guilt or remorse for his actions, not mourning for his wife or children, yet he continued to insist on his innocence despite overwhelming evidence against him. Investigators recovered his laptop search history, revealing when Carlo began plotting to end his family members' lives. It left no doubt that the act was premeditated, but his motive remained unclear until he started to confess. His explanation for the act shocked everyone. He said he couldn't just divorce Christina because it would mean dividing their substantial assets, including their home, cars, and savings, which he found unacceptable. Furthermore, he viewed his children as a burden requiring child support payments, obstacles to the happy life he envisioned with Maria. He discussed these motives with a chilling detachment. This calm and indifferent recounting of events confirmed Carlo's psychopathic nature. But whether he was sane was debatable. A psychiatric evaluation determined that Carlo was fully aware of his actions and their implications, but experienced no remorse or guilt, either during or after the crime. In January 2015, Carlo was sentenced to life in prison. He received the judge's verdict with indifference, merely commenting that he had expected as much. Later, he attempted to appeal the decision but soon withdrew it, concluding it was futile. Lastly, it's worth noting that Carlo's father passed away from a heart attack shortly after his son was sentenced, unable to come to terms with having raised a creature devoid of compassion and remorse. Eddie Pointer didn't know that his kindness would become his sentence. When he opened the door to that same boy and his girlfriend, it never occurred to him that with them, he was letting death into his home. The house he once thought of as his sanctuary would soon become the stage for a brutal massacre. It began with a small thing, a friendly gesture, an offer to spend the night. But there was already a strange fire in his guest's eyes that Eddie noticed too late. During the night, as silence engulfed the house, there were thuds in his bedroom. It turned out that inviting these two men into the house wasn't just a mistake. It was a deadly miscalculation. When they burst into the room, their faces were as cold as masks. One swift stab of the knife and blood ran across the floor, staining everything a horrible red. Eddie didn't have time to realize what was happening. The flames of the fire they had set seemed ready to wipe out everything he loved. The house burned to the ground, and with it the last traces of his life disappeared, leaving only the charred skeleton of the building. The police found only ashes and blood. No one could explain how such simple kindness could turn into a nightmare. And what made a young couple, seemingly harmless, turn into cold-blooded killers? This story was just beginning, and its ending promised to be even more gruesome. On April 16th, Miami law enforcement officials contacted detectives and said they had arrested Dale. The criminal had been apprehended in a stolen car. Detectives also found it odd that his girlfriend Jennifer was trying to exonerate herself of both crimes when apprehended, doing so ineptly and too conspicuously. The girl claimed that everything happened without her participation, which aroused even more suspicion. Against this background, it seemed especially strange that she did not try to escape from Dale and go to the police immediately after the first murder, but continued to obediently follow the criminal. When asked about it, she referred to fright and shock, but her explanations sounded unconvincing. Investigators believed she was lying and complicit in the crimes, as she had ample opportunity to escape and call for help. Interestingly, the perpetrators were caught on several city surveillance tapes where they looked perfectly calm, like a couple in love. Dale clearly did not force the girl to follow him. She did everything voluntarily. According to the suspect, after escaping from Blaine's home, they stayed in Indiana at the home of an acquaintance of Dale's. The perpetrator was about to go on the run and ordered Jennifer to return home. He believed she would not face jail time since she had not committed the crime. He promised to get in touch with her later. However, after Jennifer's confession, she was charged with 2 counts of murder, robbery, and arson, as well as tampering with physical evidence. Now investigators were focused on finding Dale. The only thing the girl knew was that he had always dreamed of traveling to Miami, so he was probably headed toward Florida. Louisville law enforcement officials contacted the Miami Police Department, informing them that a dangerous criminal was heading in their direction and already had an arrest warrant out for him. Police were especially concerned that he might kill someone else. The dangerous criminal had been on the loose for over 2 weeks and had never been located based on Jennifer's testimony. She may have lied on purpose, misleading the police and leading them down a false trail. In fact, the perpetrator who brutalized the 2 men could have been anywhere. Of course, he was considered particularly dangerous because he was willing to do anything to stay free. But before we delve into the complex and grim events, let's go back to the beginning of this story. To understand how Jennifer and Dale found themselves at the center of this tragedy, it's important to learn who they are, how their fates are connected, and what brought them to this point. How did their lives turn out before they became involved in this horrific event? How did they meet, and what ties their fates together? Understanding their pasts will help us better understand what happened and why their paths crossed in such a dramatic way. Let's take a look at how their story began, what led them to this pivotal moment, and how it all started. The time was approaching midnight, and the tranquility of Louisville, Kentucky was shattered by an alarm call. On March 24, 2006, a panic area resident called emergency services reporting a fire on Harlan Avenue. Flames quickly engulfed the wooden house, she said, and rescuers immediately rushed to the scene. Neighbors watching the raging fire could only pray that firefighters arrived in time to prevent the flames from spreading to their own homes. Firefighters faced the fury of the elements, and their efforts to extinguish the fire took nearly 45 minutes. When the flames were suppressed, experts arrived on the scene to determine the cause of the fire. But what they found was far more gruesome than just faulty wiring or a forgotten cigarette. A body was discovered inside the building, forcing forensics and detectives to be called in to investigate further. By that point, the house was almost completely destroyed. Everything inside was covered in smoke, but it was already breathable, and police officers got to work. In the bedroom, they found the victim's body lying face up. His condition was so terrible that it was impossible to determine his sex without an expert examination. However, one thing was immediately obvious. The death was not accidental. The bloodily mutilated knife handle found in the body testified to extraordinary cruelty. Stabbing a knife into a man's face took considerable effort and reflected a special degree of violence. This case has become exceptional in the practice of forensics, confirming that there was a murder here. The fire that started exactly in the bedroom where the body was found was clearly part of the perpetrator's plan to destroy all evidence. This approach made it difficult to identify the victim. Documents and photographs that could have helped in identification were burned in the fire. Detectives tried to find something useful in the mailbox, but it was empty. Even from the victim's remaining belongings, it was difficult to determine her identity or gender. The charred remains in the body were prepared for transportation to the lab. The medical examiner, removing a knife from the victim's face, discovered that it was not a specialized combat tool, but an ordinary kitchen knife, probably taken directly from the victim's kitchen. This immediately ruled out a burglary or robbery gone wrong. Everything indicated that the crime was committed in a state of extreme rage, an act of jealousy or revenge. The absence of signs of forced entry confirmed that the perpetrator knew the victim. Shortly after the incident, Police began interviewing neighbors and witnesses. By the time firefighters arrived, many residents had come outside to see what was going on. Among them was Daryl Ben, who was standing next to the woman who called emergency services. Daryl was clearly connected to the house, and when asked about possible occupants, he did not hesitate to give the name of his tenant, 40-year-old Eddie Pointer. It was ascertained that the deceased was a native of the Catholic community of Edmonton, Kentucky. He was previously married and had a daughter, but after his divorce, he decided to make a change and moved to Louisville in the late 90s. Eddie was eager to find a job, build a career, and possibly start a new life. Despite an initial warm welcome from the local community, adjusting to his new life was difficult for him, leading to his drinking problems. Despite the difficulties, Eddie Pointer remained a calm and polite man who was genuinely eager to get his life together. Life in Edmonton with addiction was difficult, but after moving to Louisville where he found a job and resolved to take control of himself, Eddie felt he was finding a path to recovery. He began attending AA meetings where he found support and new friends, which gave him hope for a better future. When it became necessary to find a new place to live, Eddie met Daryl Ben. This introduction proved to be a good time. Eddie was on the road to stability, and Daryl, as a landlord, was happy with the new tenant. Eddie had been alcohol-free for several months at this point, and he was eager to settle into his new accommodation as he continued to build his life. He quickly fitted into the local community and did not cause any problems. However, this peace of mind did not last long, only 8 months. 40-year-old Eddie was found dead in a burned-out house with a knife stabbed into his face up to the hilt. The scale of the destruction was so great that it took a long time to uncover evidence. It was only after a thorough examination of the scene that forensic investigators came across a partially burned notebook with several entries left in it, including Jennifer Smith's name. However, the phone number had been destroyed. Jennifer Smith's name was not unique, which complicated the search. Detectives had to check every woman with that name in Louisville. In the initial stages of the investigation, there was no evidence of the deceased's relationship with women or any connection to that name. Since almost everything was burned in the fire, no fingerprints or other evidence could be found, not even on the handle of the knife. All that remained were vague footprints and riddles that demanded to be solved. Investigators immediately began checking Eddie's inner circle and soon found Jennifer Smith, whose name was listed in his notebook. However, the suggestion that there might have been a relationship between Eddie and Jennifer seemed unlikely due to the significant age difference, as much as 20 years. From the beginning, the case seemed strange. When investigators tried to contact Jennifer, it turned out that she was out of town, which complicated the situation. Meanwhile, Eddie's loved ones were notified and were tasked with providing information about his entourage, which was crucial for the investigation to continue. However, the information available was not enough. This tragic news came as a great shock to Eddie's parents. His mother could not believe that her kind and calm son could get involved with dangerous people. Eddie did not suffer from mental illness and had no problems with the law. His mother mentioned that Eddie had many friends, including those in the AA community. This community may have held a clue, as the crime may have been related to some sort of conflict or love affair. However, further examination of Eddie's friends showed that they did not fit the image of violent criminals. They were all positive and supportive people like Eddie himself. None of them looked capable of such violence. At this time, Eddie's body was on the medical examiner's table. The specialist found numerous stab wounds on the deceased's face and body. Since the body was severely burned, counting the wounds was difficult. However, it was clear that the crime had been committed with extreme brutality. Eddie had been stabbed dozens of times, mostly in the upper torso and neck. The cuts were especially numerous on his hands, indicating a prolonged and fierce struggle for life. From the analysis of the burns, it was clear that the fire started directly around the body, or Eddie was set on fire after his death. This indicated that the perpetrator's intention was not just to destroy the victim, but to completely erase all possible evidence and traces. The local community was deeply disturbed as the victim lived in one of the safest neighborhoods in the city, populated by families with children who were now afraid to go outside. Residents urged police to increase security measures as rumors of the tragic death quickly spread and caused fear. Immediately after the discovery of the body, Eddie's acquaintances, shocked by his brutal death, began contacting the police station, hoping to help find the culprit. Despite their eagerness, none of the witnesses were able to provide useful information about possible motives or suspects. Eddie did not appear to be a man capable of being a victim of such violence, and at first glance had no enemies. This changed when the police received a call from Harry Perry, the dead man's best friend. He reported that in the last months of his life, Eddie had frequented small bars in downtown Louisville. Although Eddie himself had quit drinking, he continued to meet with friends at these establishments to keep in touch and have company. Harry added that Eddie was not in a romantic relationship at the time of his death, but had an extensive circle of close friends. Although he could not point to a specific suspect, Harry spoke about a person who could help in the investigation, an elderly man named Blaine Tucker. Despite the 30-year age difference, Tucker and Eddie had quickly become close friends, as they both worked in restaurants. Harry emphasized that the police should contact Tucker, who was one of Eddie's closest friends, for valuable information. However, Harry did not have Tucker's contact information, and he found it difficult to provide an exact address. He promised to check with Eddie's other friends to find out where Blaine Tucker was now. At that point, Blaine Tucker's whereabouts remained unknown, complicating the investigation. Detectives began by finding out what his job was. It turned out that Tucker was a cook at a family restaurant and worked part-time for a catering company. He was described as having a temper, but was quick to bounce back and friendly. His colleagues spoke of him only positively, emphasizing his diligence and professionalism. Tucker was known for his punctuality. He came to work first at 4 a.m. and immediately started preparing the kitchen. After the tragic events of the fire, Tucker suddenly disappeared and did not show up for work. Colleagues, concerned about his absence, were unable to reach him by phone, which seemed highly unusual for a man with an impeccable reputation and a strict work schedule. At first, they thought he had a valid excuse for his absence, but suspicions were heightened when he failed to show up at the restaurant the next day as well. This led co-workers to suspect that something serious had happened. When detectives learned of Blaine's disappearance, they were concerned. Eddie had been found murdered in a burned-out house, and Blaine hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. That could mean one of two things. Either Blaine was involved in the murder and was on the run, or he was another victim. No one at the restaurant knew where Blaine Tucker's new apartment was located, which put the search in limbo. Suddenly, a few days after the crime, a suspicious vehicle appeared near the burned-out house. As forensic investigators continued to work the scene, they spotted the driver watching closely. He parked in the driveway and watched the investigators work for a while. He then attempted to enter the building, claiming he was looking for his friend, but was stopped and detained. According to an unidentified witness, on the day of the crime, he saw Dale Manapeni, bloodied and in the company of a girl who was also covered in blood. Frightened, he quickly said goodbye to the couple and left, knowing Dale's tendency to be aggressive and temperamental. When the witness noticed that the burned house was surrounded by police tape, he suspected that Dale may have been involved in the incident. Although the witness did not know the identity of the girl who was with Dale, he was certain that the couple had been in the house for at least several days prior to the arson. The information gained led to the suspension of the search for Blaine Tucker, and detectives focused on a new direction, beginning the search for Dale and his mysterious companion. They were now the prime suspects in the murder and arson case. Not much was known about Dale, but it was possible to find information about his criminal record. He was a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes, originally from Ashland, Kentucky. Dale drove a black Honda, and his license plate was fixed, making it much easier to find him. An alert was issued, and all law enforcement agencies in the city were tasked with tracking Dale's vehicle. In addition, residents of the city were alerted through the media of the possible danger and encouraged to notify police if they saw the black Honda or the suspect himself. However, the move did not yield significant results. Dale had a criminal record for violent crimes and multiple burglaries. He liked to break into homes and sell the stolen goods to live off the proceeds. By the time these events occurred, he was barely 20 years old and also had a history of illegal substance charges. Detectives reached out to Dale's family in search of the prime suspect. Relatives reported that they had not heard from the young man in a long time, but they were not surprised that the police were looking for him. Dale had always caused trouble, had a wayward demeanor, and had been in trouble with the law on several occasions. His downfall began after the tragic death of his mother when he was a teenager. This loss affected him greatly, and he became withdrawn and violent. His mother was a single mom, and Dale was left to fend for himself. At this age, he got into partying and became a womanizer. Despite his behavior, he was charming and easily made new acquaintances, including relationships with women. Dale grew up in an environment of marginalized people, alcohol and prohibition, which did not contribute to his formation as a person. His violent temper, which was exacerbated by alcohol and illegal substances, played a major role in his criminal career. He first went to prison in 2000 before moving to Louisville, where he started a relationship with a girl and wanted to develop it. Relatives provided police with photos of Dale and helped establish the name of his lover, Jennifer Smith, which matched what was found in the murdered Eddie's notebook. Detectives learned Jennifer's address and determined that she was the one seen with Dale on the day of the crime, when both were bloodied. When detectives arrived at the address, only Jennifer's mother was home. She said that she had not seen her daughter for a long time. The woman saw the news about her boyfriend's problems and realized that the police were also looking for Jennifer. At the time, the girl was 23 years old and attending college. Jennifer and her boyfriend didn't live in the same place, constantly moving between rented apartments and motels. The mother confirmed that Jennifer was indeed dating Dale and emphasized that the girl had a strong attachment to her boyfriend. After taking Eddie's life, both disappeared, and the mother believed that they had left town. She was extremely concerned for her daughter's fate and promised to report any news. The mother asked that Jennifer not be harmed, suggesting that she might be the victim of a criminal. It took the police a long time to find any trace of the suspects in the city. But shortly after the visit to Jennifer's home, an important new call came in. It turned out that Jennifer had returned home and expressed a desire to meet with detectives. The investigators immediately headed to her home. From the very beginning of the meeting, it was obvious that the student was agitated about something. After some questioning, she began to speak candidly. Jennifer admitted that Dale had been involved in Eddie's death, but that wasn't all. She also knew that he had killed another man named Blaine Tucker and provided his address. While Jennifer was transported to the station for further questioning, a police squad went to Blaine Tucker's listed address. Law enforcement gained access to the apartment through the owner and found the 73-year-old man's body on the bed, with multiple stab wounds to his chest and torso. The attacker had used a kitchen knife, which was consistent with the method of crime in Eddie's case. There were no signs of arson in the apartment, but belongings were scattered and valuables were stolen. The knife was found next to the body on the bed. The knife was then sent for examination, where forensic experts found fingerprints on its handle. These prints matched the data in the database and belonged to Dale, which confirmed his continued criminal activity. At this time, Jennifer was being interviewed by the police. She admitted that she didn't realize how dangerous her boyfriend was when they first met. They had met through mutual friends at a party, and Jennifer was immediately attracted to Dale. At the time of their arrest, they had only been together for 2 weeks. She found Dale charming and attractive, and at the beginning of their relationship, his image seemed very positive. During the first week of their affair, Jennifer was happy despite their nomadic lifestyle. The girl's mother kicked them out of the house, not accepting their frequent hangouts in bars, and they were forced to constantly move from place to place. During one of the hangouts, they met Eddie and his buddy Blaine, both of whom were very friendly. After hearing the couple's story, Eddie agreed to take them in. At the time, he was pleased with himself, as he was able to quit his addiction to alcohol, by his own admission, thanks to the help of other people in the AA club. That is why Eddie was imbued with the idea that one should help his neighbors. He also understood the couple, as he himself had faced housing difficulties after moving. Unfortunately, he didn't realize that his kindness could turn into a knife in the face. Jennifer revealed that they had been staying at Eddie's for a few days. On the fateful night, Dale had abused alcohol and prohibition and had gotten intimate with Jennifer right in Eddie's bed. The landlord caught them engaged in this activity and was extremely displeased with their insolence, leading to an argument. Jennifer immediately left the room, and at some point Dale ran out, slamming the door, rushed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and returned to Eddie. A few minutes later, Dale came out covered in blood and said they needed to get out of the house. He grabbed the girl by the shoulders and shook her. Jennifer was shocked. Apparently, at this point, she had stained her clothes with the victim's blood. After some brief deliberation, Dale set fire to the bedroom of the hospitable host. The couple took all their belongings and fled. It all took about 45 minutes from the time of the massacre. The lovers later disposed of the items. Jennifer claimed that she was not involved in the crime and was unable to stop the boyfriend with words. She was even afraid to go into the bedroom after the murder. The girl was so scared that she didn't even think to call an ambulance. Especially, she didn't know how her boyfriend would react to it. In a state of shock, Jennifer was forced to obey him and help cover her tracks. Finding themselves in a tight spot, the couple urgently needed to find shelter for the night. Remembering that Blaine had left them his address in case they needed it, they decided to take advantage of his offer. However, after hiding the truth from him about the crime they had committed, they made sure to behave as usual. After arriving at Blaine's house, they changed their clothes, showered, and looked as if nothing had happened. Blaine, knowing that his friend Eddie had already assisted them, didn't refuse the overnight stay, although he noted their nervousness and late visit. Jennifer was so exhausted that she instantly fell asleep on the couch around 4:30 a.m. Waking up later, she saw Dale coming out of Blaine's bedroom, again covered in blood. Scared out of her wits, she didn't dare ask what had happened. Dale, as if nothing had happened, had burglarized the apartment after another massacre. Jennifer didn't even try to go into the bedroom, knowing she would see something horrible there. Instead, she dutifully gathered up everything of value as Dale had ordered, and the two of them hurriedly left the place, hiding the evidence of their crime. Dale was soon apprehended while driving the stolen vehicle. The investigation revealed that on March 30th, he visited a bar in Daytona Beach where he struck up a conversation with a 75-year-old man. Dale likely purposely targeted elderly and gullible people using his charm. This time, he convinced the old man to rent a hotel room, and once they were in the room, he pulled out a knife and threatened him. However, because the victim immediately handed over the money and car keys, Dale did not kill him. He left the hotel and attempted to break into several cars in the parking lot until he found the right one. After the perpetrator left, hotel employees treated the victim and called the police. Miami police officers quickly identified Dale from surveillance footage provided to them by their Louisville counterparts. They were able to locate and arrest him, after which he was extradited to Louisville. When questioned, Dale willingly cooperated with law enforcement. He admitted that when Eddie tried to kick him and Jennifer out of the house, an argument ensued between them. During the conflict, he lost his temper, took a knife, and killed Eddie. Dale then realized the need to cover his tracks, so he and Jennifer took all the valuables from the house and set it on fire. The next step was to take the life of Blaine Tucker, who Dale suspected might have told on the crime. The intruder used the knife again, killed Blaine, then robbed him, and escaped with Jennifer. Shortly after his arrest, Dale left no doubt of his guilt, admitting full responsibility for both crimes. He immediately took the blame for the massacres of Eddie and Blaine, claiming that Jennifer was only a passive companion, not involved in the crimes. According to him, she followed him of her own volition and did not actively participate in the crimes. After his confession, Dale was charged with several counts: premeditated murder, robbery, and arson. The judicial system was strict, and he faced the death penalty. To avoid the highest penalty, Dale agreed to a plea deal with the prosecution, which allowed him to avoid execution, but did not hinder his sentence. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole. Jennifer Smith pleaded guilty to accessory to the crimes and arson and was sentenced to 10 years in prison on September 30th, 2008. Unlike Dale, her sentence was significantly lighter. After serving 5 years, Jennifer was released on parole in 2011 when she turned 29. Sometimes love and hate are so closely intertwined that one day they can lead to a terrible tragedy. In the dark corners of the human soul, where jealousy and resentment merge into a deadly cocktail, thoughts are born that can destroy everything in their path. And so began a story that shook the small town of Milford and left an indelible mark on it. One morning, when the sun's rays were just beginning to penetrate the fog, The body of a young woman, once full of life and dreams, was found in her own home. But this was not just a murder. It was a massacre, cruel and merciless. Her face still bore the marks of violence, and there was an oppressive silence in the air, as if death itself was lingering, watching the horror that was just beginning to unfold before the detectives. Behind every piece of evidence lurked a shadow, the shadow of a man willing to do anything to satisfy his violent desires. But who was this man? A former lover whose obsession had crossed the line of sanity? Or someone lurking in an even deeper shadow? The evidence pointed in different directions, confusing the investigators and leaving them at a loss. Everyone involved in this tragedy carried a piece of evil within them, and each had their own secret. But one thing was clear from the beginning. This crime could not remain unsolved. Dark passions, once released, were waiting to turn life into a nightmare. And that nightmare was only the beginning. On August 24, 2012, Matthew Pugh, Alexandra's ex-boyfriend, was charged with first-degree murder and home invasion. At the time of the charges, Matthew was already serving time in a correctional facility for assaulting a woman in 2008. At that time, he threatened the victim with a gun, took her purse, and when she tried to resist, shot her in the arm. The investigation revealed that Matthew's problems began even earlier, when Alexandra informed him in prison that she wanted to end the relationship. According to his cellmates, the news sent Matthew into a rage. He was obsessed with Alexandra and wrote her a threatening 8-page letter. The girl began to fear for her life, and her mother initiated an investigation in prison, as a result of which Matthew was banned from writing to Alexandra. As a consequence, his prison sentence was increased by several months. Despite the fact that Matthew was furious about these events, after his release, he did not outwardly show any aggression towards his ex-girlfriend. He started a new relationship and even became a father. But in the depths of his soul, he continued to hatch a plan of revenge. But, as always, justice is slow to pass judgment. What really brought Matt to the dock? 3 years later, in February 2015, Matthew found himself in court. The prosecution argued that the crime was motivated by jealousy and carefully planned. Matthew's defense attorney insisted on his innocence, pointing to the lack of direct evidence, DNA or fingerprints, at the crime scene. However, Matthew's position took a sharp turn for the worse when he began to answer the prosecution's questions. His desperate attempts to prove his innocence looked unconvincing, especially in light of his brother's testimony. The jury went into deliberations, and the decision was not an easy one. The case was full of gaps and contradictions. Many considered Matthew a pathological liar, and there was even a need to restate his version of events in court. But to understand why justice was so harsh on Matthew, we have to go back to the days when the police were just beginning to unravel the tangle of this complex case. Some of Jason's past has been uncovered. As it turns out, he also had a criminal record, more than 5 years for selling illegal substances. He also drove a car similar to the one described by one of the victim's neighbors. Another witness reported seeing this car, dark green in color, practically all day outside Alexandra's house. Jason continued to insist on his innocence, citing that this model of car was one of the most popular in the city at the time. Checking the new boyfriend's word, detectives were never able to confirm his arrival at the clothing store to purchase pants around 3 a.m. In fact, he was there much later in the evening, which in no way matched his story. It seemed he might have been lying to lead the investigation into a dead end, but all suspicions were dispelled by accessing the geolocation of his calls. It turned out that his cell phone had not been in the Milford area all day. Police eventually removed him from the list of suspects, and it was Matt's turn again. Police spoke to Sandra's mother to find out more about him. The woman had never liked the young man. First of all, because of the age difference. Matt was 7 years older than her daughter. In addition, he had a criminal record and was not interested in development. Unlike Sandra, he didn't want to work and was dragging her down. Now detectives turned to his employer. It turned out that on that fateful day, he had actually left work much earlier than he should have. He lied about the exact time. Instead of 9:15 a.m., the young man finished work at 8:39. After that, he ended up at the gas station, but not at noon, as he told police, but at 2:10 a.m. These discrepancies, in his words, were alarming. He was indeed at the car dealerships until 4 p.m., but the time periods he himself stated were all wrong. Perhaps he was just unknowingly confused about the time, but investigators believed Matt was a criminal. On May 26th, a search warrant was obtained for his home. Inside, everything was in perfect order and clean. Nothing suspicious except for duct tape. It was suspected that it was the remnants from this roll that might have been found on the victim's face. However, this did not indicate any involvement in the crime, because many people have duct tape in their homes. All other tests and analysis failed to prove Matt's involvement. All his possessions were searched, but the results were nil. The investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. The only thing the police were able to do was to send the found duct tape to the laboratory for analysis. It turned out that this type of duct tape was quite specific and was not common. It was not sold in regular stores or on the internet. In 2006, only 3 companies out of those close to us used it. One of them was an aircraft parts factory where Matt's ex-boyfriend worked. The pieces of duct tape found on the deceased's face had the same adhesive backing. That could point to the real culprit. Law enforcement officials decided to recontact Matt's family. They were able to get some valuable information. According to his brother, Matt had a very violent and irascible character, and he even had a motive against the ex-girlfriend. They managed to find out that he gave Sandra his Nissan car in 2002 and later lent her $2,000 in 2003. In January 2004, she made the decision to break up while he was in jail and didn't pay him back anything. This probably angered him. At a time when police were still just beginning to look into Matt's past affairs, someone already sensed trouble was coming. When questioned by the police, Jason said that they had called Alexandra around noon. The couple were quietly discussing plans for the evening. According to him, the lovers were going to have dinner together. Around 12:20 p.m. during the dialogue on the phone, Sandra suddenly asked him to wait as she saw her ex-boyfriend outside the house. Jason then heard the door open and Alexandra asked, "What are you doing here?" But there was no response. The door then closed and the girl returned to the conversation, but said she couldn't talk right now and cut the call. In Jason's opinion, Alexandra let someone into her house and then didn't call back. This seemed suspicious to him, and he even got a little jealous. 15 minutes later, the girl still hadn't called back, and he started to get really worried. Luckily, she answered the phone at 12:35 a.m., and they talked for a couple more minutes. Alexandra didn't revisit the question of who came to see her or why. Thanks to Jason's testimony, it was possible to narrow down the time frame in which Alexandra died. The time frame was now 12:37 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. According to Jason, during this period, he was at work, driving his car around the city and checking equipment. After 3 a.m., he drove to a clothing store where he wanted to pick up some new pants for a date. Around 4:30 p.m., he called Alexandra again, but she never answered. So he went to her house and saw police cars outside the house. The police officers communicated with the victim's loved ones and found out that Alexandra's only ex-boyfriend was Matthew. However, they had broken off the relationship 2 years before these events. While the request for a warrant to analyze cell phones was being processed, detectives talked to the girl's relatives. It turned out that the breakup with the ex-boyfriend had not gone entirely smoothly. Linda knew that Matthew had a criminal record and that he mistreated Alexandra. Their relationship continued until Matthew went to prison for the first time in 1998. During this period, Alexandra continued to support and visit him, but he ended up behind bars seriously and for a long time. Despite the sincerity and love, there were growing doubts in the relationship. By January 2004, they officially broke up. One of the reasons was Matthew's rudeness, who was behaving in an increasingly threatening manner. They continued to communicate, but Matthew became more and more aggressive and angry. It seemed that the distance between them was only growing, and a renewed relationship was out of the question. Matthew was located, and during this period he was living with his spouse about 30 minutes away from the murdered woman's home. On the day the police arrived, he was working at a Papa John's restaurant. It was there that the 15-minute conversation with the police officers took place. The guy admitted that he had 2 jobs. The second was an aircraft parts company located about an hour north of Milford. He said he was on shift the day of the crime from 6:30 a.m. to 3 a.m., after which he went home. When he was informed that Alexandra was dead, he was a little confused. Apparently, the ex-con did not trust the police. Nevertheless, he admitted that he had spoken to her on the phone a few days before Sandra's death. But their last meeting had taken place at least 4 weeks before the tragic denouement. The detectives then left, but that was not the end of their communication with Matthew. The next day, he himself arrived at the station and reported that he had lied. He admitted that he did arrive at work at 6:30 a.m., but at 9:15 a.m. he asked his supervisor to excuse him and left. He spent virtually the entire day at home and then went into town in the afternoon to drive a sick relative. In any case, Matt claimed he was not in Milford or even near the suburbs that day. He agreed to DNA testing and provided police with his clothes that he wore on the day of his ex-girlfriend's death. Despite admitting to lying, Matt's alibi was able to be confirmed. Nevertheless, he and Jason remained the prime suspects in the crime. However, to really understand this confusing story, it is necessary to delve deeper into the lives of not only Matt, but also Jason, Alexandra, and her boyfriends. After all, it is their complicated relationships and ulterior motives that could be the key to unraveling this tragic denouement. Let's find out what was really going on in their lives and what could have prompted such a terrible outcome. On December 9th, 1979, Alexandra Duxey was born in New Haven, Connecticut. Her family and friends knew her as Sandra. Alexandra's childhood was spent in the picturesque Milford neighborhood, just an hour's drive from New York City. Her parents, John and Linda, met in 1974 and married a few months later, creating a tight-knit family. Alexandra had 2 older brothers with whom she always maintained a close and friendly relationship. Despite the age difference, they protected their younger sister and helped their parents by playing sports and spending time together in active games. The family lived in a spacious house where the basement became Alexandra's personal space. Over time, she turned it not only into a cozy bedroom, but also into a gym, where she often invited friends for sleepovers and spending time together. Since childhood, Sandra was fond of dancing and gymnastics. In high school, she had a dream of becoming an actress, an aspiration that matched her bright and energetic character. Dancing was an important part of her life, and she actively participated in various contests and competitions, winning awards and recognition. Sandra's life was full. In addition to dancing, she was a serious student, aspiring to get a degree in law. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in college and took dance courses while getting a part-time job at a bank. During one of her outings, she met her first love, a guy named Matthew. They both shared a love of sports and a drive to succeed. Sandra later earned a bachelor's degree in finance and became a systems analyst at the same bank, where she worked for several years. She devoted almost 10 years of her life to dancing, while simultaneously obtaining her real estate agent's license. At the age of 23, Sandra also became a teaching assistant at a dance academy. Her career path developed rapidly. She often performed in New York City, participated in dance routines at events, and even starred in music videos. When she turned 26, she started working with an Atlanta-based producer, creating demos of music videos for music albums. Her dreams slowly began to come true. She found an agent in New York who helped her get cast, and soon Sandra got a role in a popular TV series. It was a minor role, but for her it was an important step on the road to success. However, because of the busy career, Sandra had almost no time for a personal life. Although she dated Matthew for several years, in January 2004, they decided to part ways. Alexandra decided to focus solely on work and dancing. At the same time, her family was also going through a difficult period. Her parents decided to separate, and her father returned to Florida to be closer to his elderly mother. Sandra's brothers had already moved away, creating their own families, leaving her alone with her mother. Even though most of the house was empty, Sandra continued to live in the basement, which she had equipped for her needs. Here she had everything she needed for training, as well as a stand with numerous awards for her dance achievements. In the basement, she lived together with her large dog. Her busy life did not prevent her from continuing her acting auditions, and she had new prospects in the movie industry. During the same period, Sandra began to actively engage in charity work, organizing the collection of things and toys for children from low-income families. She also planned, together with like-minded people, to open a free canteen for the needy. But everything changed on May 19th, 2006. That day, Sandra met up with her best friend Nicole, with whom they worked out together at the gym. They worked out from 10:15 to 11:15 a.m., after which Nicole left and Sandra decided to stay and work out some more. Then she was going to go home, have lunch, clean up, and get ready for her evening plans. Nicole tried to contact Alexandra around 4 p.m., but her call went straight to voicemail. This was highly unusual since Sandra was always on call due to her busy and demanding activities that required constant communication. Nicole had never experienced a situation where Alexandra didn't return a call. When Linda, Sandra's mother, drove up to the house at approximately 4:30 p.m., she immediately noticed that the front door was wide open and Sandra's beloved dog was on the patio. The white Mitsubishi car that Alexandra drove was parked in the driveway. It all seemed strange. The door of the house was always tightly closed, and the dog couldn't go outside without a collar and leash. This time, however, she just sat there, tail wagging. Panic gripped Linda, and she hurried into the house, calling out to her daughter, but there was no response. Anxiety grew with every step. Climbing the stairs to the basement, Linda found large drops of blood on the floor. Going lower, she noticed another large stain. What she was able to see next was horrifying. A woman's legs lay in front of her. Sandra was on her back, motionless and without signs of life, in a huge pool of blood. She had suffered a serious head injury and was lying under the table in the room in an unnatural pose. Linda's initial thought was that her daughter might have fallen down the stairs and hit her head on the radiator, which also showed a bloody mark. Linda, unable to believe what was happening, rushed to her daughter to check for a pulse, but there was none. Barely containing her emotions, Linda dialed the emergency number. In a panic, she screamed into the receiver, describing the horrible scene she had witnessed. The dispatcher had difficulty understanding her because of her confused speech and tears interspersed with incoherent mumbling. Eventually, the dispatcher realized that Linda had found her daughter dead on the basement floor. Several officers arrived on the scene. When they entered the house, the sight they saw in the basement was one of the most gruesome of their careers. Blood was splattered all over the basement, especially on the floor, but also on the furniture and walls. Even the memorial table with the 12 trophies and awards was covered in drops of blood. Sandra's face was literally crushed. The damage to her head was so severe that one eye was missing. A blade shard was found in her skull, and the blade itself lay nearby. Sandra had been stabbed with a kitchen knife with such fury that the handle of the knife broke off and the tip remained inside. Alexandra suffered a serious facial injury. The girl's mother noticed that one of her trophies was missing and assumed that it was the one that had been stabbed that had destroyed all of Alexandra's beauty. Police officers immediately realized that she was a murder victim and her injuries were incompatible with life. In addition to the horrific injuries and the crime weapon, detectives found a distinct shoe print in the basement with blood on it. However, it was not a regular sole. It appeared as if the shoe print did not have a tread pattern. Faint traces of blood were also found in other rooms, including the bathroom, where there were traces of blood on the toilet seat and sink, presumably left by the assailant who was trying to wash his hands. Investigators also identified attempts to clean up blood in some parts of the house, indicating an attempt to cover their tracks. Law enforcement officials suspected a personal motive for the massacre, especially given the missing trophy. The brutality and force with which the blows were delivered convinced investigators that the perpetrator should be sought among the victim's acquaintances. Most of the furniture and belongings in the apartment were left untouched, but almost all the clothes were taken out of the closet. Jewelry and money, which could be of interest to the robbers, remained in place. All this gave the impression that the perpetrator was looking for something, as things were scattered on the bed and floor. According to the police, Alexandra was attacked when she went down to the basement. She was probably pushed down the stairs, which led to the first injury, hitting her head on the radiator. The girl was not killed immediately, as evidenced by clear signs of a struggle. Detectives immediately realized that the knife used to kill Sandra was brought in from outside the house, as none of the cutlery in the house was missing. Investigators also gained access to the victim's cell phone and more than 100 numbers she knew and had to thoroughly check each of them. When investigators examined the crime scene, they found one curious detail. The trash bag had been pulled out of the trash garbage can. This indicated that the perpetrator was probably trying to hide the evidence and avoid leaving any traces. He may have changed into different clothes and used the large bag to get rid of items covered in blood. By 5 p.m., Alexandra's brother and her friend Nicole arrived at the scene of the tragedy. The girl was shocked and hysterical, as she had seen Sandra alive just a few hours ago. The quiet neighborhood of Milford, where Alexandra lived, was shocked by what had happened. Locals were in an uproar and sought any information about what had happened, but police refused to make any comment until they had all the details. The house was carefully cordoned off. Nicole said that after practice, Alexandra was going to get ready for a night out with her new boyfriend. They planned to spend the evening at a restaurant. Her friend mentioned that his name was Jay, but she couldn't provide other details, such as a last name or additional information. This mystery man caught the special attention of investigators. Detectives and Alexandra's loved ones began canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing possible witnesses in hopes of finding important leads. Milford was known for its low crime rate, and this tragedy shocked the entire neighborhood. Alexandra was a local celebrity thanks to her supporting roles on the TV series Law & Order, and her tragic death drew national attention. The police asked the media for help in locating witnesses, which sparked a real wave of interest from local journalists eager to get any information they could. While investigating the murder case of Alexandra Duxey, police encountered scattered testimonies from neighbors. One of them said that at about 12:30 a.m., he noticed a red pickup truck near the victim's home. The vehicle was clearly not registered to local residents, he said. Another witness, around 4 p.m., saw a dark-skinned male walking past the house and then getting into a dark green Honda Accord. Unfortunately, neither witness remembered the license plate numbers or the exact location of the vehicles. While detectives were trying to clear up the details, Alexandra's new boyfriend, Jason Malone, caught the attention of law enforcement. Initial attempts to contact him were answered by his sister, who provided the necessary information. When Jason came in for questioning, he looked visibly agitated, but firmly maintained that he had nothing to do with the incident. Jason explained that he and Alexandra started dating after he went to the bank with a friend. According to Jason, he was so smitten with her beauty that he asked his friend to give him her phone number. Alexandra, impressed by such a romantic gesture, agreed to give her contact, and they soon started chatting, which led to their first date. At the time they met, Jason was a couple years older than Alexandra. He had just moved out from his ex-girlfriend and was living with his mother. He was having trouble rebuilding his relationship with his ex and was having trouble on the personal front. He worked for a power company, checking electric meters around town. Alexandra preferred not to rush to make any official statements about her relationship with Jason, as after a long 6 years with her previous boyfriend, she wanted to approach the new romance cautiously and not jump to premature conclusions. This caution seemed to be a foreshadowing of the unpredictable and tragic changes that were looming. And so, as the picture of events began to take on increasingly darker shades, the investigators' attention returned to one of the key players in the case, Matt Pugh. Despite the available evidence and the complexities surrounding the new suspect, it's worth focusing on Matt's interrogation and seeing what else can be gleaned to shed light on this tragic story. A new twist in the investigation came on June 14th when the suspect was re-interviewed. Detectives made arguments pointing out inconsistencies in his statement. Despite this, the suspect was able to explain all the discrepancies, and police once again did not have enough evidence to file charges. It was only towards the end of the year that DNA tests provided new evidence. The blood found in the basement was entirely Alexandra's, while the blood drops in the bathtub were mixed. It was the blood of Sandra and an unidentified man. However, due to insufficient concentration, an accurate DNA profile could not be extracted. Experts could determine that the perpetrator was a dark-skinned male. But this did not help solve the case, as both of the main suspects, Matt and Jay, shared the same trait. Hair found on the victim's body could not be identified, and fingerprints found at the crime scene did not match those of the suspects. Even a specific shoe print remained undetermined. Eventually, the investigation came to a dead end once again. In hopes of moving the case forward, a $50,000 reward was put out for any information that could help solve the crime. In 2010, it was decided to expand the search and ask for help from prisoners. Photos of Alexandra were sent to correctional institutions. In September 2011, police received a call from an inmate named Paula. He claimed that his former cellmate Christopher Richards had allegedly had an affair with Alexandra 2 years before her death. According to Paula, Christopher and Alexandra were together in the period between her breakup with Matt and the beginning of her relationship with Jay. Information about this relationship was unknown. Paula also reported that Christopher, upon learning of the breakup, threatened to kill Alexandra. However, subsequent investigation revealed that Paula had lied. Christopher had no relationship with Alexandra, and there had been no correspondence or phone calls between them. In all likelihood, the inmate was trying to frame his cellmate. 2 weeks after that incident, a bus driver named Jeremy, who had been friends with Alexandra for a long time, showed up unexpectedly. He recalled that he had once witnessed the girl receiving a threatening message from a man named Donovan, demanding repayment of a debt and threatening to kill her if the money was not returned. Jeremy claimed that this happened just 2 weeks before the tragedy. However, it turned out that this claim was also false and irrelevant to the case. 6 years passed, and finally, in August 2012, detectives managed to get really important information. They were approached by Anthony Pugh, Matt's cousin, with whom the police had already spoken earlier. It was he who told about how Matt gave Alexandra a car and lent her $2,000. However, Anthony's story began long before these events, back in 1993, when Matt involved him in criminal schemes. Subsequently, both were convicted, but in 2005 and 2006, alternately released and got a job at the same factory. Despite the good relationship, a year later Matt betrayed his brother, and Anthony was again behind bars. The resentment against his brother was accumulating, and now he decided to take revenge by revealing the whole truth. Anthony revealed that after breaking up with Alexandra, Matt literally went mad with jealousy and began to contemplate killing her. Initially, he planned to inject her with a lethal dose of an illegal substance to make it look like an accidental overdose. But when he found out about her new relationship, Matt switched to a more brutal plan of reprisal. Anthony also said the brothers worked at an aircraft factory where Matt stole gloves and special duct tape that he intended to use to commit the crime. Police were inclined to believe that Anthony was not lying, as he clearly wanted a reward for his information. He later explicitly stated that his goal was not only $50,000, but also a just punishment for his brother. In verifying the information, police discovered that they had previously missed an important fact. At around 11:47 a.m. on the day of the crime, Matt was indeed in cell phone coverage in Milford, and then left briefly. At 12:07 p.m., he returned to the area again and remained there for over an hour. This information was the crucial basis for Matt's arrest and charges. And, as is often the case, anxious premonitions did not fail. Soon evidence was found that made everyone shudder. Forensic experts revealed the cause of the girl's death. Multiple stab, slash, and blunt head injuries, inflicted mainly in the facial area. It was confirmed that she was killed not only with a knife, but also with some kind of trophy that was missing from the house. She was beaten so badly that she swallowed several knocked-out teeth before she died. Experts managed to find one important piece of evidence: a single hair stuck to the dried blood on the girl's body. It didn't seem to belong to Sandra herself. They also found pieces of duct tape on her face, apparently used to cover her mouth during the massacre. In late August 2012, after years of investigation, Matthew Pugh, Alexandra's ex-boyfriend, was finally charged. The charges included first-degree murder and trespassing in her home. Despite the defense's best efforts, the case was convoluted and complicated, but the evidence against Matt was overwhelming. When the jury went to deliberate, no one could have predicted how long it would take them to reach a verdict. The deliberations dragged on as they had to sort out all the details of this convoluted story. It took 3 tense days before the jury, having carefully weighed all the evidence and testimony, reached their verdict. Matthew Pugh was found guilty of first-degree murder and trespassing. The court sentenced him to 60 years in prison for the murder and added another 20 years for trespassing in Alexandra's home. This harsh sentence, handed down amid years of uncertainty and suspicion, was the final act in a tragic story that had gone unsolved for so long. Sometimes kindness becomes a fatal mistake. No one expects that behind a sincere desire to preserve the family, restore relations, or simply support a loved one, something dark and destructive can hide. Paul has always been a good father and a faithful husband, ready to turn a blind eye to all the wrongs for the sake of their children to grow up in a complete family. He believed to the last that he could save their marriage, that his love was stronger than lies and betrayal. But that fateful night, his kindness turned into a death trap for him. When Jacqueline invited him to the bar, he didn't suspect a trick. Her smile seemed warm, and her offer to have a drink together a chance for reconciliation. He didn't know that this evening would be his last, that her every gesture hid a cold calculation. A few hours later, Paul could barely stand on his feet, and an hour later he was gone. The house that had always been his refuge had become an arena for a brutal massacre, and those he trusted most were his executioners. Death came to him from the man closest to him, the man he swore his love to, fought for, and who did not hesitate to take his life for a measly insurance policy. On May 17, 2007, the court found Roger and Jackie guilty of murder, and Colin Robinson guilty of accessory after the fact. Roger's mother, Dawn Ferguson, also did not escape punishment. She was accused of trying to confuse the investigation by giving her son a false alibi. The prosecution argued that Roger had lied in an attempt to portray himself as a victim of Jackie's manipulation. However, the prosecution was certain. The two of them had carefully planned the crime to obtain insurance, staging it as a failed robbery just to get the money. The trial was over, and it seemed that the truth had been revealed. However, to understand how it all happened, you have to go back and find out what led to these decisions. Detectives scrutinized the phone records, focusing on the conversations with Roger. The man's confiscated cell phone revealed important details. He was communicating with 17-year-old Colin Robinson. On the night of the massacre, at 2:21, Colin made a call that immediately caught the attention of investigators. The young man admitted to being at the house, but had originally planned to drive a car that belonged to the killer. During the interrogation, Colin could not stand it and admitted that he had lied. He revealed that he had been helping his buddy dispose of the body. According to him, when he saw that Roger was going to kill Paul, he got scared and ran away from the house, getting into his car. Later, Roger called him and offered to get into the car. When Colin opened the door, he discovered Paul's body in the back seat. The young man tried to run away, but Roger intimidated him and forced him to stay. As a result, they drove the car into an alley together and left it there. The trial that followed lasted 4 months. The evidence and confessions collected led to a trial. But what happened the night it all began? Let's move to the moment when the horrific events were just beginning to unfold. On the eve of the tragedy, Jackie decided to move the children to her paternal grandmother's house and invited her husband over for drinks and socializing. Her spouse, hoping it would help mend their relationship and stay connected to the children, readily accepted the offer. This was unexpected for Jackie, who usually avoided socializing with her husband and preferred to spend time alone or in the company of other men. That evening, she took her husband to the pub and insisted that he drink more, almost forcing him to do so. By nightfall, he was barely on his feet. The bar's CCTV cameras captured the moment they left the establishment at around 1:23 a.m. and went home. After that, the man was never seen alive again. The call to emergency services came in at around 2:35 a.m., and the journey home took approximately 5 minutes. The time lapse of over an hour raised suspicions among investigators, who began to suspect that Jackie may have purposely gotten her husband drunk so that he would not be able to resist the attack. While examining the scene, detectives found several inconsistencies in Jackie's story. A cell phone was found on the nightstand with the screen upside down, contradicting her claim that she was dialing emergency services. It was impossible to dial a number with that screen upside down. Moreover, officers found Jacqueline with her hands tied, but not her legs. She claimed that the intruders attacked her husband, beat him unconscious, and then strangled him with a plastic bag, placing it over his head and tying it around his neck with duct tape. She also mentioned that she vomited out of terror, but no traces of vomit were found at the scene. The doctor who examined the victim noted no change in her pulse and blood pressure, which seemed strange for such a shocking event. Forensic experts found a shoe print in the hallway of the house that matched the size of Roger Ferguson's shoe. In the urn was found a cigarette with the DNA of the lover, and on the cable ties, which were tied to the victim, also found traces of Roger's DNA. The bag used to strangle Paul had traces of his DNA on it. No other traces were found. In the end, it turns out the widow's story was a lie. As time passes, it becomes clear that the events were not random, but what exactly led to the decision to massacre. Let's move on to analyze what happened before the crime, when everything seemed still normal. Jacqueline, or as her close friends and family called her, Jackie, met Paul Krimble when she was 17 years old. They were both high school seniors getting ready to graduate. It was obvious from the beginning that they were complete opposites. Jackie was bold, outspoken, and energetic, even feisty, causing constant problems for her parents. Paul, on the other hand, was reserved and shy. For him, Jackie was his first serious romantic infatuation, and their relationship began despite their differences. They were so different that they sometimes seemed completely incompatible. Jackie was known for being abrupt and impetuous. Her words could be harsh, while Paul remained polite and humble, always smoothing over sharp edges. His ability to respond calmly to her outbursts characteristically stood out and even looked comical at times. When the time came for Paul to meet Jackie's parents, the event came as quite a shock. Jacqueline's parents were used to her temperamental boyfriends, and they expected new problems. But Paul surprised them with his kindness and warmth. Unlike his rambunctious daughter, he seemed like the perfect young man to start a family. Jacqueline's family quickly became attached to Paul, and sometimes it seemed that they looked forward to visiting him even more than Jackie herself. A few months into the relationship, Jacqueline became pregnant. Paul, who had grown up in a religious family and held traditional views, was a committed Christian. Upon learning that he would become a father, he felt a great sense of duty and decided to devote himself to raising the child. The future father was determined to support his girlfriend and actively discussed how he would raise his children. In 1992, the couple decided to get married, and Paul proposed to Jacqueline. He was not going to leave her alone with the child and always strived to be an ideal father. On the eve of the wedding, during the bachelor party, Paul decided to have a frank talk with one of his close friends. He confessed that he did not feel real love for Jackie and realized that their characters and outlook on life were too different. The friend tried to talk him out of the marriage, but Paul couldn't go against his religious beliefs. He knew that Jacqueline was pregnant with his child and felt a moral obligation to marry for the sake of the child. Paul tried to convince himself that their feelings would grow stronger over time, hoping, like many young people, that marriage and children could bring them closer together. 6 years after they exchanged vows, Paul and Jackie had their second child. Consequently, they decided to move to a larger residence. Their financial situation improved and they purchased a townhouse in Richland. Paul, who worked as a mechanical engineer, earned a good income while Jacqueline took care of the house and children. She tried to find work from time to time, but her attempts were often unsuccessful. From the outside, their lives may have seemed prosperous, but it was during this period that the cracks in their relationship began to show. Family acquaintances noticed that Jackie would often leave Paul with the children, visiting the local bar herself. When someone who knew her made remarks to her, she reacted in a hostile and aggressive manner. This behavior was typical of Jacqueline, who held the entire family in fear and caused everyone around her a sense of constant wariness. In the small town where they lived, Jackie's rambunctious lifestyle had a negative impact on the reputation of the entire family. Gradually, she gained a reputation as a promiscuous woman, and the more conservative residents called her a promiscuous woman. Even bar workers disliked her presence because of the frequent conflicts she was involved in. Problems also arose in family life, where her brash and aggressive behavior caused tension. The children later recalled that dealing with their mother was like being constantly on the edge of a precipice. Jacqueline's aggression could erupt from even the most innocent of questions. Over time, her children became afraid of their own mother, and Paul also clearly felt uncomfortable in her presence, sometimes appearing to be afraid of her. Eventually, this strained relationship led to a terrible tragedy. In the early morning hours of Sunday, June 20th, 2004, an alarming call came into the emergency services. On the line was Jacqueline, who claimed that she and her spouse had been attacked by unknown assailants. She said that a group of intruders had broken into their home. According to her, she was tied up, and her husband was severely beaten and taken to an unknown destination. This happened just after the couple returned from a party at a bar. Fortunately, the children were at Paul's parents' house, as the couple decided to spend the evening alone. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Jacqueline, who looked alive and unharmed. Outwardly, she appeared to be partially free of her restraints. Her legs were free, but her hands were still bound with plastic ties. The police officer cut the ties with a knife. Jacqueline reported that she and Paul were attacked by 3 unknown men when they tried to take cover in the house, but did not make it in time. The intruders went inside, threatening with guns and demanding money and illegal substances. Paul, known for his good judgment, tried to negotiate, but they did not listen to him, tied them both up, and began beating them. After that, they strangled Paul with a plastic bag. Once they were satisfied that there was nothing of value in the house, they took the car keys and drove away, taking Paul with them. Jacqueline hoped her husband was still alive, but also feared that the police might not have enough time. Panicked and alone, she dialed the emergency number, using her tongue to press numbers. Police officers immediately put out a BOLO for the family's vehicle, and investigators tried to get a more detailed description of the perpetrators from Jacqueline. However, she said the attackers' faces were concealed by masks, and she could not provide any descriptive details. Nevertheless, the development of events was rapid. The very next morning, just 3 kilometers from their home, the couple's abandoned car was found in an alley. Inside the car, police officers found the body of Paul, a 35-year-old man who had been the victim of brutal beatings. His limbs were bound with cable ties, and the condition of his body indicated possible torture. The car with the body was sent to a laboratory for thorough analysis. Initially, Jacqueline's version was accepted without much doubt. However, after analyzing the evidence and talking to family, friends, and acquaintances who described Jacqueline's difficult character, she quickly became the prime suspect in the crime. The reason for this was her aggressive behavior in and outside of the family circle. The situation became more complicated when it was discovered that Jacqueline had an extramarital affair with Roger Ferguson, a 31-year-old local farmer. The fact that Jacqueline was secretly dating Roger was known to virtually everyone in the neighborhood. The relationship began to develop shortly after the young family moved into their new home. The more the police delved into the details of the victim's family life and Jacqueline's romantic relationships on the side, the clearer the motive for the murder became. The attack by a group of armed men described by Jacqueline looked like a movie plot, especially for such a quiet and peaceful community. In addition, none of the locals had seen anything to corroborate her account of the thugs, making her story highly dubious. With suspicions growing about Jacqueline, investigators discovered that the marriage was on the verge of collapse. Paul had a life insurance policy worth £300,000. Financial motives often play a key role in such crimes, and investigators were quick to point out that before her husband's death, Jacqueline had repeatedly raised questions about money. Several witnesses confirmed that she was interested in the possibilities of insurance payouts. These suspicions were also confirmed in her social media correspondence. Particular attention was drawn to Jacqueline's claims that she was able to dial the emergency number in language. To verify this, her cell phone was sent for forensic analysis, so that forensic scientists could determine whether her saliva residue was left on the touchpad. Lab analysis confirmed what she said, but by this point, new evidence had emerged. A few days after Paul's death, Jacqueline was called back in for questioning. She continued to deny her involvement in the crime and insisted that it was the work of a gang. As there was insufficient evidence at the time, she was not charged, and after talking to the police, she was released and allowed to attend her husband's funeral. At the funeral, Jacqueline showed deep sorrow, but Paul's close friends thought her displays were fake. At this time, detectives began investigating Jacqueline's lover, Roger Ferguson, to confirm or deny their suspicions of his involvement in the crime. The police were convinced that the widow and her lover may have been involved in Paul's death, but this required hard evidence. There were no witnesses to the attack and kidnapping. Roger had an alibi, corroborated by his mother, who claimed her son had been home all night and interacted with him around 2 a.m., when he got up for a drink of water. Nevertheless, Jacqueline's lover was in no hurry to be ruled out as a suspect, and it was soon confirmed. Since clear evidence was lacking, investigators turned to the cell phone data of both suspects. This data showed that after Paul's death, Jacqueline and Roger continued to maintain a relationship. Locals often saw them together at the pub where they first met a year before Paul's death. Many visitors to the establishment described Jacqueline as irascible and prone to conflict. She socialized brashly, especially in Roger's company. Even before her husband's death, Jacqueline was not shy about showing off her wealth, often boasting that Paul was a wealthy man and considering herself the full mistress of his property. After meeting Roger, the couple often visited the billiard club, but not all of Roger's friends approved of her presence. Most advised him to stay away from Jacqueline, but Roger continued his relationship with her despite the warnings. Studying the lovers' correspondence, investigators discovered that a few days before Paul's death, Jacqueline had planned to buy a new SUV worth £23,000 for Roger. Remarkably, even Roger's mother was present at the car dealership, confirming the seriousness of their relationship. During interrogations, Jacqueline claimed that she remained faithful to her husband and had no extramarital affairs, but her false statements became commonplace for police officers. Jacqueline did not have enough money to buy a car and could not get it from her husband. Nevertheless, her plans for the expensive purchase indicated that the widow was already beginning to think about how to spend the insurance payments, even before Paul's death. Jacqueline took a job at a nursing home. This decision indicated her plans to rebuild her life, probably with the intention of starting a new chapter after separating from her husband. Police speculated that Paul may have begun to suspect something amiss because of his wife's changed behavior. Her temper and frequent conflicts could have caused serious strain in their relationship. Neighbors noted that Jacqueline often left the house and returned late at night, and after meeting Roger, her absences became more frequent and longer. She justified her absences by saying that she was working, but Paul never saw proof of her employment, such as money or pay slips. Jacqueline did break even with occasional earnings, but she couldn't hold down one job for more than a few weeks. From her first days at her new job, Jacqueline exhibited defiant behavior and often lied to her supervisors. She also continued to deceive her husband, making up stories, such as about her children supposedly being in an accident, to justify her tardiness and absences. One day, when Jacqueline's co-workers called home to inquire about the children's well-being, Paul was surprised to learn that everything was fine. He then discovered that her stories were lies created to cover up her frequent absences. These events only heightened Paul's suspicions. He received confirmation that Jacqueline was spending time away from home and probably with a lover. Despite this, Paul decided to continue his relationship with his wife because he did not want a divorce and wanted to keep the family together for the sake of the children. Paul was deeply attached to his children and feared that the divorce would affect their mental state. He also feared that Jacqueline might make it difficult for him to communicate with his daughter and son. Despite his wife's constant cheating and lying, Paul was willing to put up with it so as not to destroy the family. To cope with the difficulties, he focused on work, tried to avoid conflicts with his wife, and did not pay attention to her rare appearances at home. Everyone around him saw how much effort Paul put into his family, but Jacqueline always remained dissatisfied, finding reasons to criticize. Paul's childhood best friend, Jean, had long considered their marriage loveless and repeatedly advised Paul to consider divorcing his unfaithful wife. Paul steadfastly refused, as he was determined to support his children and feared losing them. However, with each passing year, his resolve waned. Even Jacqueline's relatives recognized her tendency to humiliate her husband and children, as well as her aggressive behavior. They condemned Jackie and tried to persuade her to behave more decently, but all their efforts were in vain. Just a few days before his death, Paul went on a motorcycle tour along the coast of Spain with his best friend. This trip was the fulfillment of his long-held dream and provided him with an opportunity to take a break from family stress. During the trip, Paul confessed to his friend that his marriage was on the verge of falling apart, but he still wanted to keep the relationship alive for the sake of his children. He also reported regular threats from Jacqueline, who manipulated access to the children if he decided to leave her. Sadly, this journey proved to be Paul's last. A month before the tragedy, two men broke into Paul's home while he was asleep resting after work. At that moment, Jacqueline was not at home with her children, which seemed a strange coincidence. Paul woke up to a noise in the hallway and, thinking the family had returned from shopping, got up and called for his wife. Instead of her, one of the intruders came at him with a shovel. Paul managed to dodge and strike the attacker. but the second perpetrator drew him away, and both attackers eventually fled. The next day, Jacqueline provided a bizarre explanation for the incident, claiming that the attack was revenge for conflicts that had occurred during her time in the army. However, those close to her knew that Jacqueline had never served in the military, and her story was a complete lie. During the investigation, detectives uncovered several shocking facts that indicated a massive deception on Jacqueline's part. It turned out that Jackie had systematically manipulated her lover, Roger, turning him against Paul. She accused her husband of heinous crimes, including violent assaults, forced group intimacy with strange men, and infection with venereal diseases. In addition, Jacqueline made the absurd claim that she was expecting twins who allegedly died because of Paul's violent attacks. These false accusations clouded Roger's judgment, leading him to believe that Paul was systematically beating not only Jacqueline, but also their children. But her deception didn't end there. The investigation revealed that Jackie had repeatedly tried to find hired killers, willing to do away with Paul in exchange for a portion of the insurance payout. She even offered potential perpetrators a deal, promising them a generous reward for their favor, referring them to an upcoming insurance payout. These revelations dramatically changed the course of the investigation and called into question the entire story Jacqueline had presented. When Jacqueline realized that she could no longer manipulate her husband, she made the decision to part ways with him, maximizing financial gain for herself. In the event of his death, she would inherit all jointly acquired property and the substantial savings her husband had accumulated. Jacqueline's lover was believed to be aware of all these plans and willingly agreed to participate in her plan to help eliminate the problem. The judge described the crime as the ultimate expression of betrayal, comparing it to the biblical scale of adultery, which reflected the depth of the victim's faith. Paul fought to the last to keep his family together for the sake of his children, but his noble efforts turned into a tragedy that cost him his life. Jacqueline was never able to get life insurance on her spouse's life. The £300,000 was given to children who suddenly lost both parents. In 2013, Paul and Jacqueline's 22-year-old daughter, Danielle, publicly expressed her contempt for her mother in an interview. The girl said that even while behind bars, Jacqueline continued to manipulate the children using parental rights. She not only repeatedly called her daughter and son, but also tried to convince them of her innocence, offering money in exchange for freedom. During one visit, Jacqueline promised to sign a permission slip for school field trips, but her only interest was in securing her freedom. She insisted that the children support her cause and help secure her release. Danielle and her brother refused to visit their mother and help her, which resulted in Jacqueline not signing the necessary paperwork. As a result, the children were the only ones in the class who could not participate in field trips. The magnitude of Jacqueline's meanness was appalling. Danielle tearfully recalled how, just 2 weeks after her father's death, Jacqueline secretly burned all of his belongings, leaving nothing for the children to remember. Jacqueline seemed obsessed with erasing any memory of Paul. Danielle, despite the hardships, was able to keep a few photographs of her father. Jacqueline did not allow the children to live with Paul's parents, and they ended up in the care of strangers. This forced them to move to a different neighborhood, leaving behind school and old friends. Danielle and her brother were placed with different families, and their environment changed several times during their growing up years. The girl recalled how her family endured ridicule because of her mother's reputation, nicknamed the Black Widow. Children in new groups were often bullied because of this stigma. Danielle lived with 6 different families and faced serious challenges. As a teenager, she often ran away from home, and it wasn't until she was 17 that she managed to get her own apartment through social services. She went to college and began to rebuild her life. When she turned 18, she was finally free and received her share of the inheritance, which gave her a chance for a fresh start. Her convict mother could no longer influence her life. However, the past continued to haunt her. Later, when Danielle got a job as a kindergarten assistant, she met her boyfriend. For a long time, she avoided talking about her story, but when this confession took place, the boyfriend supported her, which strengthened their relationship and helped Danielle find inner peace. The court eventually handed down sentences for the perpetrators. Roger Ferguson was sentenced to 18 years in prison, Jacqueline received 20 years in prison, and Colin Robinson was sentenced to 3 years. Roger's 57-year-old mother was released and given probation for 1 year. For many, This was a welcome end to a horrific case, and the victims' relatives were relieved to learn that the brutal Jacqueline would be behind bars for years to come. The killer's own mother, seeing the extent of the betrayal and cruelty, felt that such people deserved the rest of their lives behind bars and would have preferred Jacqueline to never go free. For Paul's daughter, Danielle, Jacqueline's 20 years in prison seems too lenient a punishment. She claims it is not just an injustice, but a true mockery of her loss and the suffering her mother caused her and her brother. Danielle has openly admitted to reporters that she is horrified at the prospect that Jacqueline, 40, will soon be released from prison and may reappear in her life. As her incarceration began, everyone turned their backs on Jacqueline, and her former entourage left her to fend for herself. The only one who continued to visit her was a father named Ronnie. He came to the prison regularly for the first 9 years, but as the years went by, his visits became less and less frequent. When Jacqueline's brother passed away, she wanted to attend his funeral, but her own family urged her to stay in prison and stay out of their business. In 2027, when Jacqueline's sentence expires, she will be released. Her constant denials of her guilt only cause more fear among those who remember her crimes. People fear not only that Jacqueline will be free again, but that her return could bring more trouble and destruction. Whether she can ever atone for her crimes remains an open and unspeakably tragic question for those who lived through her dark legacy.